10 o'clock, good morning. I'm Jonathan Schaefer. Ole Miss scored twice on wild pitches in a 3-run eighth inning as the Rebels won their first national baseball title, sweeping Oklahoma in the Men's College World Series Finals with a 4-2 victory on Sunday. Carl Ravitch with the call on ESPN. The Colorado Avalanche defeated the Lightning 2-1 in Tampa Bay to capture the Stanley Cup. It is their third title in franchise history. Cole Makar won the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP. It feels like the race just ended, actually. That's how late it was last night. Chase Elliott won the Ally 400 at Nashville Superspeedway. The race was delayed twice due to weather for Elliott, his second victory of the season. And Major League Baseball, the Dodgers defeated the Braves 5-3 in 11 innings. For all your foundation repair and waterproofing needs, visit USSTN.com. Breaking news at once on Over the Titans and the Vols. This is 104.5 The Zone.
Hello, good morning, and welcome into the Buck Reising Show Takeover, Day 2. Yes, we are still here. I'm Lucas Panzica, along with Will Bolling today until 1 p.m. Will, happy Monday.
Hello, how are we?
Fantastic, because we're still here. Robert Walsh is our producer, and all of you are our accomplices in this takeover effort. It would not be possible without your interaction with the show. 615-737-1045. Join us on Zone TV, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. A lot to talk about today. And Will, that is a good thing because it hit me last night as I'm flipping between Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final, the Ally 400 at Nashville Superspeedway. Shout out to everybody that braved the continuous delays there last night. The Braves-Dodgers rubber match. It hits me that this past weekend, we kind of saw the curtain closing as far as the 2021-22 sports calendar goes. Ole Miss wins the College World Series. Avs take home the Stanley Cup. And now we enter the darkness, so to speak, where it's baseball and soccer the rest of the way until football season.
Yeah, and if you're saying that, then it's really darkness because you're a soccer guy. So you're
sure.
okay with half of that.
Nothing against those sports.
I'm okay with all of them.
I'm very much looking forward to some more evenings and afternoons at Geodis Park for the next few months.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, now's the time to catch up on all your TV shows.
It is. Robert Walsh, good to see you as well. Good to see both of you this morning. This really does feel like a hostile, maybe a not so hostile takeover. You're on this show every day.
No, it's hostile.
Okay. Anything, honestly, before 1 p.m., no disrespect to Blaine and Mickey or 3HL. Anything before 1 p.m. on this station is pretty hostile, considering the personality that Buck Reising has and the violence that J. Martin Ramon, is trademarked with from 6 to 10 every morning. But no, it's great. I consider myself one of the only people on planet Earth who is both a diehard baseball and diehard soccer fan. It's one of my favorite sports times of the year.
Yeah, there are dozens of you.
Dozens. No, it's I love that gift. No, it's great. I love it. Not a lot of other people love it, and it puts a lot of you to sleep. I find myself enjoying this time of year quite a bit. I don't hate summer like many other people do when it's 100 degrees, so I'm loving life.
It is a nice little reprieve, I guess, from feeling like maybe people are normal and they're not like us and they don't feel like they have to check in with every game that's going on, every sporting event that's happening. But thankfully, college football never sleeps.
Well, that's true.
So that's going to carry us right into media days, right into the regular season. I mean, college football is getting to the point where the offseason is just as entertaining as the regular season.
Well, and the chaos of what NIL is, like until the NCAA figures out how to mandate these things, it's great for the neutral observer. It's great for the people out there and those of you that are NFL fans first and foremost and are more in tune with what the Titans are doing, more in tune with what's going on in the league. I feel like this is a great time to be a neutral college football fan. And to be able to look at the chaos that's going on in the SEC, look at the fights between Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban and say, I have no dog in this hunt and I love every second of it. Because like the NBA, the offseason is becoming almost as entertaining as the season in college football. And that bar has gotten a lot lower as Alabama has dominated more, as Clemson has been dominant, as Georgia has become elite in college football, when you only see the same 5-6 teams go to the college football playoff, we have to have something tangible that we can cling to and say, this is a real thing about college football. And I don't know what's going to happen with it in a month, because a sport that has become so predictable is finally becoming a little bit more unpredictable. And I'm here for every second of it.
Steve Spurrier dubbed it talking season, but when Steve Spurrier said that, all you had in these summer months in college football was recruiting and just preseason chatter. Not a lot of real news to speak of, right? Not a lot of roster attrition. But here we are on June 27th, 2022, and the story of Jaden Rashada, the four-star quarterback prospect from California, is fascinating. And we typically don't open this show with recruiting, but this shows some layers to where we're at right now in the world of college football. Rashada is the number 7 quarterback in the class of 2023, and it had been a very highly contested recruiting battle in the Sunshine State between Miami and Florida for his commitment. On Sunday afternoon, Rashad commits to Miami, commits to Mario Cristobal, and On3 Sports comes out with this story. Michael Caspino, the NIL lawyer that represents several high-profile prospects, he tells On3, also represents Rashad, he tells On3 Sports that Rashad turned down an $11 million deal with Florida to accept a $9.5 million deal with Miami because he, quote, loves Miami, the coaches, and the opportunity. Goes on to say, Florida is the most dysfunctional collective in all of college football. I plan on steering my clients away from them. From my standpoint, I never, ever want to deal with them again. If it weren't for the collective that is completely dysfunctional at Florida, he probably would have been there. And then Gator Collective, in turn, comes out with a statement denying all of that. And we'll get into that on the other side. But essentially saying they refuse to even engage in dialogue with this guy, who, by the way, represents about 100 high school football prospects, some of the highest rated prospects in the country. Florida fans proceed to melt down. And maybe rightfully so. I just don't know that their blame is going to be placed correctly.
Yeah, I think it's fair. And I think this is a situation where the court of public opinion matters a whole lot. Because the perception out there that Florida doesn't know how to handle name, image, and likeness is going to make Florida a non-starter for a lot of 2023 guys and 2024 guys. I don't know if it really affects Florida in the short term as much as a lot of people think, as much as Florida fans think at this point. Because one lawyer not steering some guys to Florida probably at the end of the day doesn't really make that big of a difference. But the perception out there has been since the beginning of Billy Napier's tenure in Gainesville that he just doesn't really care about this stuff, and he's not going to play by the same rules as Mario Cristobal at Miami, as Josh Heupel at Tennessee, Lincoln Riley at USC, some of these coaches that are taking full advantage of name, image, and likeness in order to go from good to great, to steal the Titans moniker. I'm fascinated to see how this affects their class of 2023 group, because Billy Napier didn't sign a lot of guys when he got the job and had to turn around a quick class in 2022. And he took pride in the fact that we're going to scout guys the right way. We're not going to sign a huge class. It's something that he has done in the past. He's known as a guy that does his due diligence, that is very instrumental in the scouting process of the guys that he had at Louisiana in his past. So interested to see what happens with this, because this is a situation where even if there is nothing accurate about what Caspino is saying and the money thrown around between Miami and Florida, just the fact that Florida's collective has to release a statement is a pretty big problem right now for Florida until they get somebody else to overshadow this.
Yeah, that's the hard part with all of this. You don't know who to trust. You can't trust anything that you see because none of it's definitive. You can't trust an allegation that this kid's receiving $8 million at this school or $9 million at this school, because none of that's public info. Like Jimbo Fisher a few weeks ago in the immediate aftermath of the little spat with Nick Saban, I remember was grilling a TV reporter about allegations on Texas A&M and paying for their recruiting class. And he's just going at this guy who's interviewing him saying, well, your media, have you done your research? You haven't done your research.
Right.
And the reporter was kind of trying to shrug it off and move on. But I wish you would have come back with, Jimbo, we can't do our research. we have no idea what you may or may not be paying these kids because it's not public info.
Right.
We don't have to know. It's going to lead to so much reporting and different reporting on the same topic that you're going to be stuck throwing your hands up saying you have no idea who's talking to these kids, who's offering these kids what. And it does make for fascinating theater in college football, like you said, but at the same time, it has to be frustrated for a fan base like Florida right now.
Well, and the collective thing is so interesting because you can pay through a collective for future endorsements, and that's the way Tennessee obviously reportedly has gotten the pledge of Nico Iamaleava. It's well documented, the $8.5 million that he's had. My question for guys like that are, does the market reset when somebody reportedly signs for $9.5 million or $11 million? Because when a tight end, when George Kittle signs his contract, when Aaron Donald signs his contract, obviously that resets the market in the NFL. Those are concrete numbers that we know what they are. That's the interesting thing now, is that if one lawyer is going around in Tennessee, hypothetically, of course, saying, hey, I got a quarterback from California at 9.5, you're going to up our guy, make Nico earn 10 a year? Well, you don't have anything to go off of with that. You don't know if that's 100% true. But again, the court of public opinion and the perception of something that somebody might be getting paid is what makes this so fascinating, because there are going to be guys that are going to see reports like this. They're going to see legitimate collectives and lawyers come out and say, hey, my guy's getting 9. Hey, I know I agree to do 8.5 for my entire season, but I want 10 now because I'm better than that guy in the recruiting rankings. Like that is the path that we are headed down. We haven't had to get to this point. Everything that we are seeing right now in college football and NIL, it's the first time we've seen it, because this is the first full offseason with name, image, and likeness. So the next steps of this, we have no idea what's going to happen. And that's what I love about this. It has made a predictable sport unpredictable. And especially the fact that it's happening in Florida. I don't think a lot of people here are too upset that it's happening to them and not anywhere near here.
Well, and it's funny, you mentioned Billy Napier and paraphrasing, but you kind of put him in that, and a lot of people have put him under that umbrella of coaches that have not fully embraced NIL the way that a Josh Heupel has, right? Or the way that Texas has, or keep going down the list. And I feel like a lot of people have done that to Napier, but I wonder if that's unfair, because he hasn't been like Dabo Swinney out there saying this is bad for college football, right, making comparisons to the people carrying luggage around in the airport and flight attendants and the CEO of Delta. Like, Dabo, what are you talking about? But Billy Napier has just come out with nuanced statements on NIL saying it's going to be a strength here at Florida. We're going to put our student athletes in the best opportunities, yada, yada, yada. All he has said is what we won't do is just get into bidding wars for kids moving forward. And I feel like more coaches than not share that sentiment with Billy Napier. But I also feel like that quote has just put this blanket over Florida and Billy Napier that they're not caught up with the rest of the NIL era. And maybe they're not.
Doug Matthews has told us this before, that anytime a coach speaks in any kind of press conference or statement, they're just talking to their players. When it comes to recruiting, you're talking about things in recruiting. All you're doing is using a public voice to talk to your recruits. The big headline and the big money topics and conversations from Billy Napier are the ones that an 18-year-old is going to remember. An 18-year-old that is looking at Florida, maybe as a running back or wide receiver, is probably not going to remember whatever Billy Napier says next. He's going to remember the fact that a lawyer said, hey, don't go to Florida. They don't know how to do NIL. And so you're going to look down the road at Miami, and a guy in Mario Cristobal who is recruited at an elite level everywhere that he has been in college football, was outstanding at Oregon, recruited the state of Florida well there, is going to continue to do that at Miami. So the next steps of this and the way that Billy Napier handles this, I think, will ultimately define the way he handles name, image, and likeness. Because you're right, when you think about guys that aren't going to handle NIL well, you don't think of a first-year head coach, a younger guy who's getting his first opportunity as a Power 5 head coach. You think of the old guys who have done this a different way in the past and just simply aren't going to adjust to the way that you do it now. I believe that Billy Napier probably has a pretty good idea of how to handle name, image, and likeness, but the perception of this is that it's a disaster. So that's just kind of what it is right now.
Well, and the problem with that, too, is how much of it is just out of his hands. And that's what we're going to talk about next. How difficult is it in this new era of college football to evaluate head coaches, given what we don't know about their specific NIL situation? We'll tell you that, a little bit more about why Florida fans are freaking out right now and how this might affect your team in the SEC. Coming up next, it's the Buck Reising Show on 104.5 The Zone.
The Buck Reising Show is powered by Spring Hill Heating and Cooling. Go to springhillac.com.
Welcome back. Rolling right along on this Monday. Hoping to make the next 2.5 hours go by quickly for you. Lucas Panzica, Will Bolling with you until 1 o'clock. Robert Walsh making things happen on the other side of the glass. Talking about this recruiting battle that went down in the Sunshine State over the weekend. 4-star quarterback Jaden Rashada committing to the U over the Florida Gators, and now drama based on the NIL opportunities that allegedly were offered to Rashada from Florida, being an $11 million mark, but he allegedly takes the money from Miami, a $9.5 million mark. If this had happened to Tennessee, think about the meltdown.
Oh.
Year one, I mean, you got a new head coach, hasn't coached a game yet, that already, boom, it's decided he can't keep up with this new era of college football. I feel like that's what's happening right now among the Georgia fan base.
Yeah, and especially with
Florida, I'm sorry, not Georgia.
Especially with Tennessee. If this was happening with Josh Heupel, you would have people not only calling for Josh Heupel's job, but Danny White's job at that point, because this was Danny White's guy, and that hypothetical world, Tennessee fans are saying, oh, here we go again. Classic Tennessee.
And I think this reaction would be quicker on Josh Heupel because he didn't have really the recruiting pedigree that Napier has had.
Billy Napier's recruited really well. Obviously, at Alabama, that was a strength of his. At Louisiana, that was a strength of his. I think it's an interesting discussion because Dan Mullen's undoing at Florida was in part because his 2022 class was horrible. And Florida believes, and I agree with the fact that you should never have a horrible recruiting class at the University of Florida, in the state of Florida. The problem with that is that Mario Cristobal is one of the best recruiters in college football. We touched on this in the last segment, but Mario Cristobal had 2 top 10 classes in Eugene. After his arrival at his alma mater in December, Miami closed the 2022 class, finishing number 16 in the high school rankings and number 12 in the transfer portal rankings. I think the new NCAA rules of the amount of players you can add over the course of a season, if you have a certain amount of departures, and I think that the ability to recruit the portal with NIL gives guys like Mario Cristobal and Billy Napier an easier foothold in rebuilding things more quickly, gaining momentum more quickly, bringing in veterans more quickly than any other coach at any other phase of college football has been able to do. Mario Cristobal has done a better job taking advantage of that than Billy Napier has. That's just kind of where things are at that point. So things are only going to get tougher for Mario Cristobal and for Billy Napier as each of them meets with coaches. They learn how to recruit the state of Florida more than they have in the past. But it doesn't look good right now if you're a Florida fan. And you're I think, saying, here we go again, when you see that your new guy can't recruit and your old guy couldn't recruit. That's the feeling at this point for sure.
And it's deeper than just this recruiting battle between Florida and Miami for Jaden Rashad. It's so much deeper than that because this is something that could permeate throughout college football and among its fan bases. It's going to change how we look at head coaches because now you're in a spot where you're right. Billy Napier, you mentioned his recruiting pedigree at Alabama. I mean, some of the names that are quote unquote attributed to Billy Napier during his time at Alabama, Jerry Jeudy, Cam Robinson. I mean, some of the biggest names in the Nick Saban era. He led, or Calvin Ridley, another one. He led the Sun Belt in recruiting with Louisiana Lafayette in 1920 and 21, consistently finishing at the top of the conference. Taj Boyd, he's assigned as Taj Boyd's primary recruiter at
Tennessee
Clemson.
Legend?
Yes, as a 5-star prospect. You can go all the way back to the Taj Boyd era, pre-Deshaun Watson at Clemson. So there aren't question marks because this could snowball into criticism of Billy Napier. Oh, he can't recruit with the big dogs. He'll never bring in enough talent to win a championship at Florida. All the things that were being said about Dan Mullen, but this might not be a Billy Napier problem. This could be a Florida problem. Napier might not have what he needs, and the frustrating part of it all is we don't know unless someone involved with the situation tells us, right? It's not public info like we said off the top. If he doesn't have the resources that right now it doesn't appear he has, at least to the extent of a Miami, then it doesn't matter what he does. He won't keep up. He just won't. Florida can fire him. They can bring in the next guy, but it will be a vicious cycle, and we have to separate now how we judge a program's recruiting, and it's not that simple because we don't have the details.
I think for right now that's the case. I think as the NCAA puts more red tape around NIL and around the way all this works, maybe we get a little bit more clarity about what a head coach's role actually is. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, like the Supreme Court pretty strongly ruled that the NCAA can't mandate a lot of these things.
That's what I'm saying. What red tape can we have here?
Yeah.
What red tape can we have that will overrule state laws?
Well, I think at some point the NCAA is going to make an example out of someone. And lawyers are going to get involved in it, and it's going to be messy. And it might be Tennessee. Honestly, it might be Miami. It could be anybody. It could be Texas with the NIL things that they're doing. But the NCAA doesn't like being shown up. That's the one thing that is consistent through that organization over the past 20 years of collegiate athletics and beyond from that. They don't like being shown up like a baseball umpire doesn't like to be shown up. They're going to make an example out of someone and say, look, the collectives, the offering money before a guy is signed with your school. I think someone's going to get bit with that. And I think Tennessee fans have every right to be a little bit worried that it might be them. And I have no concrete info to judge that based off of, but we have precedent of just looking at Tennessee, the entire Bruce Pearl situation. I know that's changed a lot now on the way the NCAA would handle that, but there are a lot of precedents for the NCAA being shown up and being shown they're not the toughest guy in a room and coming back and making an example out of someone. Doesn't always happen. Didn't happen to North Carolina. Didn't really happen to Syracuse all that much. But it's happening to LSU basketball. And that's the example we can point to now and say, when you spit in the face of the NCAA, sometimes it does come back to bite you.
I just think we're in a spot now where universities and athletic departments have more power over the NCAA than they've ever had. That if you're not,
there's no doubt.
If you're not violating state laws with whatever you're doing, then you have nothing to fear. I mean,
Right.
that's the approach John Ruiz that down in Miami is taking. One of the biggest boosters in Miami has not been shy about the NIL deals he is facilitating with transfers, with recruits, and the latest, of course, Jaden Rashada, allegedly a $9 million deal with the U. Again, we have no way to confirm or deny whether that is indeed the case. We just have what his lawyer said to On3 Sports. But the NCAA is knocking on John Ruiz's door. They're poking around.
Right.
And John Ruiz is out here talking to Sports Illustrated saying, yeah, they can come here. They can look at whatever they want. I don't care. He's got a big smile on his face saying, look around. Look at whatever you want. Try to levy whatever you want on me. I know I haven't broken any state laws. There is nothing you can do unless maybe you prove that this deal was facilitated by, someone within the athletic department.
Right.
I think that's the only thing that could get people, pull people under here.
I do think it is fair to say that the infrastructure of what it takes to be successful in college football has changed. Mm-hmm. It's changed forever. You got to have the money. You have to have that big name booster, it seems like, to kind of lead those efforts, unless you're Texas and every booster you have, has a big cowboy hat and has a lot of money. But I do think it's fair. It's going to be harder to judge how much of this is actually Billy Napier's fault at Florida, how much of this is Florida's NIL collective, not completely working. I think that's going to be the case at a lot of the big powerhouse schools. I think at some of the, let's say, mid-Power 5 programs, take Missouri. A school like that, for example, a team that is not exactly a brand name in football, but has been good enough to at least consider itself among those that have high expectations within the SEC, of playing for an SEC East championship, of playing for an SEC championship, when all the stars align and they are good.
Oh, they set that bar the second they entered the conference. They won 2 SEC East titles.
With the other James Franklin.
Yeah.
Joriel Green Beckham, a Titans legend, within that group as well. But how does a school like that manage its infrastructure and its expectations? Because you can't expect to spend with the likes of a Tennessee, a Texas, Miami, USC, the schools that have been at the forefront of the NIL collective model. So how much of that, as we kind of talk about some of the coaches on the hot seat, how much of that really affects the expectations in-house? Because now you have to really be rowing in the same direction of your head coach, your athletic director, your chancellor. Everyone within that university has to have a pretty clear image on what are we willing to do? How much are we willing to pay for name, image, and likeness? Do we want to wade into these waters? Do we want to try to be good at it, but still use the same formulas we've done in the past? I think that's kind of the way Florida has gone with this. Or are you Josh Heupel in Tennessee, you're Lincoln Riley in USC, and saying we are going to be publicly all in on this, be at the forefront of this in order to return our program where we believe it deserves to be? That's the biggest question.
And right now, if you're not at that level, you're behind. In the grand scheme of things, in NIL, you are behind. Because look at what has just happened in front of us with Florida and Miami. And you mentioned the frustrations being pointed at one thing or another. Gator fans are freaking out because they read that statement from Michael Caspino, the lawyer who represents Rashada, comes out and says, Florida is the most dysfunctional collective in all of college football. I will steer my clients away from them. Literally saying, I do not ever want to deal with them again. This was after he told On3 Sports that his client denied an $11 million deal from Florida to accept a $9.5 million deal with Miami. By the way, the largest reported NIL deal that we've seen so far. So Florida fans are like, how is our coaching staff so inept that he is going to take less money and go to Miami because he likes Mario Cristobal and his staff better, right? I feel like that's where a lot of their minds probably went in this thing, because the article also talks about Rashada's comfortability with the coaching staff and the program and the culture. But I do think that their frustration should be pointed in a different direction than Billy Napier, because I see Gator Collective coming out, who On3 Sports in the story says is the collective Caspino is talking about as being one of the most dysfunctional in the country. They come out and say, we refuse to engage in any dialogue with this guy. We don't approve of his tactics. And Caspino might be a shady guy. Yeah, I don't know him personally, but regardless of his tactics, he represents a whole lot of talent in the world of college football recruiting. He claims to represent over 100 kids. He claims to represent a certain guy that allegedly has an $8 million deal signed with the University of Tennessee in Nico Iamaleava. So it can snowball into criticism of Billy Napier. But if I'm a Florida fan and I see the list of names under this guy's umbrella, and I see Gator Collective coming out and saying, now we won't deal with this guy, I'm not thrilled with the direction that things are going in as far as keeping up with the big dogs in this NIL era of college football when Tennessee is doing it and we're not.
I don't know. If I'm a Florida fan, you're still recruiting the state of Florida, and you still have a leg up on everyone, because the second best tier out of the state of Florida is better than the best kids out of the state of Tennessee, the state of North Carolina, many other places within college football. But how about this? That Tennessee-Florida game this year, one of those two fan bases is going to be spiraling quickly into the 2022 season. Think about that, because Florida now under Billy Napier, Florida fans can at least, the more optimistic out of that group can sit back right now and say, you know what, we've never seen him coach a game. This guy's got a good personality. The scared money don't make money mentality that he's bringing to Florida. He's recruited in the SEC. He's built a really good G5 program. Let's wait and see. Let's see the proof of concept and see what he does on the field. If Florida then goes and loses to Tennessee, Billy Napier not only becomes the coach that can't recruit and can't keep up with NIL, he becomes the coach that has lost another short, albeit, streak to Tennessee. Look on the flip side. Tennessee's on the complete opposite end of the discussion. If Tennessee loses at home in Neyland Stadium to that Florida team, and Tennessee fans are now sitting back and saying, oh my goodness, you know, we just got a bunch of money and threw it at one quarterback. That's great, but we just lost to a guy that can't recruit and can't handle NIL. What are we doing? Is Josh Heupel really the guy? And then that becomes the conversation. I'm not saying that's what the conversation should be. I think we know Tennessee fans well enough to say that's 100% what is going to happen. So I am here for the meltdown of either one of these programs after that Tennessee-Florida game, but it adds so much more intrigue into a game that already was the biggest on Tennessee's schedule going into this season.
So G. Allen Taylor, he covers the Florida Gators for The Athletic. He reports in the midst of all this drama that Florida has two NIL-focused groups, Gator Collective and Gator Guard. Taylor is saying that he thinks On3 Sports got them mixed up. That Gator Collective, who comes out and denies, saying, we don't talk to this guy, this lawyer, Michael Caspino, who says we're the most dysfunctional NIL collective in the country, we don't associate with this guy. So Taylor is saying he thinks On3 got him flipped.
Which is a problem in and of itself, by the way. That you're not associating with, like, the lawyer in NIL.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So either way, it's a lose-lose.
Yeah, right.
But that's what I'm saying. If you're a Florida fan, whether your frustration's pointed at Billy Napier or at the way the program embraces name, image, and likeness, if what G. Allen Taylor is saying is correct, okay, and On3 Sports mistakenly refers to Gator Collective in the report and not Gator Guard. Okay, let's say that's the case. So Gator Guard refuses or Gator Collective refuses to talk to this lawyer. Gator Guard did offer the kid $11 million, and the kid still chose Miami for $9.5 million. Either way, it's a lose-lose.
Yeah.
No matter how you shake it up.
An 18-year-old kid doesn't need to hear the follow-up because they probably don't care. all an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old has heard is that, Florida's not really the move right now. It's literally that simple. Also, why do we have two collectives at the same school? Is this a thing?
Because Gator don't play no bleep.
I don't think other schools have multiple collectives. Like I'll raise my hand and say I didn't know really the extent of what an NIL collective was. Like I knew they existed. I knew what Spire Sports Group was for Tennessee, but like I didn't understand the scope of what this was until like a couple months ago. Like what?
Oh, nobody did.
Does the average college football fan understand that? What is going on? Because I don't think the average college football fan really cares about all these things. Like the fact that I cover Tennessee and we talk college, like why do they have two collectives? That makes no sense to me. Like this seems to be something that's really, really simple of, hey, let's have one organized push and let's all row in the same direction in this one organization. And they've got two of them and now reporters are mixing them up.
It's going to lead to misplaced frustrations and evaluations on certain head coaches that may have their hands tied in ways that we don't know about. And it could lead to programs just spinning their wheels on this because you can fire a guy in a hypothetical world where in 3-4 years from now, Florida just never, we're still talking about Florida in this context. Billy Napier is not able to get over that hump, especially in recruiting, and they let him go, bring in somebody else. You'll just spin your wheels unless you catch up with the rest of the college football world. It's going to lead to misevaluations of coaches when we think of them as recruiters because we have no clue what they're up against, what advantages they may or may not have. So it's a fascinating conversation to me. I want to talk to Barrett Sallee about this at 11:20 of CBS Sports. He'll join us. How long will it take for this to come into play when we talk about evaluating head coaches as recruiters? I mean, it's going to put some of them on the hot seat. It just is. And it could be out of their control. And it's going to lead to some coaches getting fired over situations that they just didn't have much help on.
And we're going to get into this as the show goes on today, too, of the college football coaches who have the hottest seats going into 2022. And I've got a couple of those that we can do here coming up that are within the SEC that I think are possibly gone at the end of the season. One of them, I think, is gone mid-season this upcoming year. But I think, Lucas, it prioritizes having a marketing-savvy athletic director. That's the thing that I think becomes really important at this point because a lot of this, what we're talking about, organizing NIL, figuring out the ways that these collectives work within athletic departments, isn't the job of the head football coach. The head football coach is there to benefit off of what a university puts in place. That's where I see Tennessee having a really good advantage right now with Danny White. The history of marketing savvy, fundraising at UCF and the things that he did there, the entire athletic department at UCF and the entire AD at Tennessee this past season having so much success. I think it prioritizes ADs that are a little bit mean and are gangsters, so to speak, behind the scenes that are able to get things like this done. And I don't think that it's something that really fit Philip Fulmer with the era of NIL and the era of college athletics that Tennessee is heading down now. I don't think Philip Fulmer would have known how to handle NIL as intelligently as Danny White does. I think Danny White is more forward-thinking on things like this. So Scott Strickland now has a choice to make at Florida and say, I just hired this guy. My entire legacy as the athletic director at Florida hinges on this hire. Doesn't matter the basketball coach he just hired, other things that he's done, Kevin O'Sullivan at baseball, keeping him. Doesn't matter. His AD will be really predicated based on what Billy Napier does, and he's got to make a choice on how forward-thinking he wants to be in order to set up Billy Napier to succeed.
Not talking about Billy Napier getting fired yet. Guy hasn't coached a game. But I do want to know which SEC coach you have as potentially not making it through the seasons.
Yes.
College football coaches on the hot seat going into 2022. We'll do that next. It's the Buck Reising Show on 104.5 The Zone.
Let me tell you about my friend Gary Ashton and the Ashton Real Estate Group of RE/MAX Advantage. Gary is the don't sell without the intel guy. So people ask him all kinds of questions, including, what's it like to work in real estate? Well, if you're looking for a great career, I know 3 reasons why you should join the Gary Ashton team as soon as possible. 1, success. The Ashton team was just named the top RE/MAX team, not just in Nashville, but in the entire world. 2, Trust. Nashvillians like me trust Gary's team because they live here, they love it here, and they offer careers with unlimited potential. 3, community. The Gary Ashton team sponsors both the Titans and the Preds, and they were just recognized as the #1 donation source for the Children's Miracle Network. Bottom line, the Gary Ashton team added 65 new agents last year, and they want you to join the team this year. So don't sell without the intel, and if you're looking for a great career, the Gary Ashton team wants you in 2022. Call the Gary Ashton team with RE/MAX Advantage today at 615-301-1650 or visit GaryAshton.com.
Welcome back. Good choice, Robert. Back to a little Mac Miller on the Buck Reising Show on this Monday. Lucas Panzica, Will Bolling with you.
Never go wrong with little Mac Miller.
No. This is on the Buck Reising Show playlist. You can find on Spotify. Ton of songs on there. We're like nearing 300, but plenty of Mac Miller in there too. Talking about Billy Napier and the situation that he faces right now at Florida as far as what the program, the lengths it's willing to go to keep up in the world of NIL, the lines that it wants to draw, potentially handcuffing Napier a little bit, but he hasn't coached a game yet. So we're not going to talk about how long Billy Napier is going to last at Florida because we have no idea. However, there are some coaches going into the 2022 college football season that are watching their backs. Some conferences have more than others, but we'll start in the footprint, Will. And you told me you had two in the SEC, and I'm interested by that because I cannot think of one past Brian Harsin at Auburn.
Brian Harsin is the obvious choice for sure, because I think Brian Harsin doesn't make it through this season. We're going to ask Barrett Sallee about this coming up at 11:20 also, but I think if Brian Harsin loses to LSU at home, it might be curtains for him. And that goes back to a couple years ago when Les Miles and Gus Malzahn coached in the Fire Bowl, as I like to call it, a few years back. Les Miles ended up losing that game. He was gone. If Gus Malzahn had lost that game, he's probably gone at that point. So I don't think Brian Harsin makes it through this year. I don't think you can come back from the amount of infighting that there was over the offseason to get him out. He's not really an SEC guy. He's not an Auburn man, quote unquote, which is one of my favorites. There are certain programs that you have to be a quote unquote that team's man. Like I don't know what it is. Like Tennessee,
Auburn is
man.
definitely
It's like,
one of those.
the Auburn family. Like,
Carolina's
shut
the same way. It's like, you have to hire within the Carolina family. That's why Hubert Davis got the job, because he was within the Carolina family.
I think there's some of that sentiment, some of that in Tennessee circles.
So much.
Simply because of
way too much.
I mean, you look at the greatest coaches in Tennessee across athletics, right?
Yeah.
Like Pat Summitt, Philip Fulmer, Johnny. They were all Tennesseans. So I think some do still subscribe to that.
But what makes you what makes a program because I feel like we say it's got to be a Tennessee guy.
Yeah.
Auburn, it's like, no, an Auburn man.
Right.
Like what
That's a good point.
What takes it from a guy to a man?
There's a huge difference.
615-737-1045.
Please tell us. Yeah. No, but you're right. Like Brian Kelly was a quote, I'm using air quotes here, was not a good fit at LSU. Why? Because he wasn't born in Baton Rouge?
Because he didn't have mama's gumbo from, he doesn't know grandma and them from down the way.
It would help.
I mean, it wouldn't hurt.
No, it wouldn't.
The other guy that I think is on the hot seat this year, and I don't think this coach gets fired this upcoming season, but I think the seat gets piping hot, and he's probably 2 years away from being gone. Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri. If I were to ask you how many ranked wins does Eli Drinkwitz have at Missouri, how many would you guess?
I'm going to say 0 right now.
1.
Who would it be? Maybe a Kentucky win?
Bad LSU team in COVID. Because
2020.
Missouri won that game, 49-42 in Como in 2020. A 5-5 season.
A wretched LSU team.
A horrible LSU team. That self-imposed postseason ban halfway through the season.
That shouldn't even count as a ranked win.
Because they knew that team ended up 3-7 that season, and then self-imposed a postseason ban because it was like, you're not going to not invite us to a bowl. We're not going to go anyway.
How gracious.
Ha-ha! And it didn't really, do much to affect the NCAA, allegations and violations that were given to them. But Eli Drinkwitz is 11-12 at Missouri. He has a bowl game loss to Army in the Armed Forces Bowl. That team finished 500, 5-5, obviously, in 2020. Eli Drinkwitz has recruited okay, had the number 15 class in 2022. That's fine for Missouri. It's not great.
Headlined by a 5-star wide receiver,
right?
Which was a huge get and a bit of a head scratcher for me.
The 2021 class, 27th, when Eli Drinkwitz came in that opening season. So I think Eli Drinkwitz, as much as he talks and as loud as that guy is, has to back up a lot of that talking with winning, and it hasn't really happened. He had the win over Florida, the lightsaber thing after the game where he's making fun of Dan Mullen and all of these things, and that's all fine and good. But I think the results on the field don't match up the aggressiveness with which Eli Drinkwitz talks about himself and his program. So I think by the end of this season, that seat is getting pretty hot because as bad as that team was on defense last year, Tennessee just scored another touchdown since this show started against Missouri on defense last season. If that defense isn't better under new leadership on the defensive side of the football this year, I think Eli Drinkwitz has the hottest seat in the SEC going into next season.
It is fun to watch the life that head coaches get at programs like Missouri, the life that they get from beating downtrodden programs that are expected to contend for championships, right? Like he beat Florida, and that was a 6-6 version of the Florida Gators. I mean, Dan Mullen was all but fired at that point, but he still beat Florida, and you get as much praise for that as you would if that was a 10-2 Florida team. With Butch Jones, It's the same thing.
That's how James Franklin got the Penn State job. He beat Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida while they were all the worst they've been in a decade. I mean, that's how mid-level SEC programs get good, from okay to good. They don't go good to great. They don't go up to the level of a Georgia and Florida at their peak and, programs of that level, because that's really been the SEC East as those two teams. But Eli Drinkwitz benefited from a lot of SEC East programs being down. I just don't see him taking that next step. I see that 5-5 team in 2020 being the peak of what he can do there.
When you look at their non-conference slate, Missouri's that is, Louisiana Tech, Kansas State, to open up their first couple of weeks, get Abilene Christian in week 3, and then New Mexico State's your only other non-conference matchup.
Not exactly a murderer's row.
Not a murderer's row.
You're probably going to make a bowl game.
If you can lose 1 or 0 of those non-conference games, namely Louisiana Tech, Kansas State, let's say you split those, your SEC West opponents in 2022, if you're Missouri, are Arkansas. They play every year during rivalry week, and Auburn.
I don't. That's a hot seat bowl right there.
Absolutely, week 4.
Because I think the only win Missouri is going to feel confident about within the SEC is Vanderbilt. I actually think that Vanderbilt is one team that I think makes a little bit of a jump forward this upcoming season. I like Clark Lee's vision for Vanderbilt. I think that he has got an intelligent way to rebuild that program. I think if Eli Drinkwitz loses to Vanderbilt, then we're talking about Missouri's looking for a head football coach this upcoming offseason. Because at that point, I don't know if Missouri has an SEC win that you really feel good about. And Arkansas is better than them. Auburn, I think, is more talented than them with the pieces that they have. Zach Calzada and the talent that Brian Harsin actually has at his disposal this year. So that's the team I'm watching this year, because the venom with which Eli Drinkwitz speaks does not match up with really any winning other than a win over LSU in a pandemic and a win over Florida where he dressed up as Darth Vader afterwards.
That is an interesting question. I think Harsin is inherently under more pressure than Drinkwitz, just being the head coach at Auburn.
Oh, yeah,
you are inherently under more pressure, especially after the saga that was at the end of last season with, like you said, the infighting among Auburn's powerful people. But looking past the SEC a little bit at conferences that have the most head coaches facing pressure this year, it's hard to look past the ACC. And it's not a surprise given how down the conference was last season. But whether it's Mike Norvell at Florida State, Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech, who hasn't been able to win more than 3 games as he enters his 3rd year, Dino Babers, who has fallen off a cliff at Syracuse, Scott Satterfield at Louisville. It is, you look at the ACC, there's going to be some turnover in the ACC, whereas when you look at the SEC, we struggle to think of 2 names. And Eli Drinkwitz is a good point. That's not one that I had thought of. I feel like his leash will be longer at Mizzou than it would at an Auburn.
Yeah, you're right.
You make a bowl game this year, you're probably safe if you're Eli Drinkwitz.
And I don't think he's fired this year. I just think that's a name to watch for a couple of years down the road as the next closest.
Yeah. But of those names, just looking at the ACC, Mike Norvell, Jeff Collins, Dino Babers, Scott Satterfield, what happens to you? One of those gets fired or Scott Frost gets fired first?
I think Scott Frost is fired first, because I think the amount of unrealistic expectations at Nebraska are unrivaled within college football. Maybe by Florida State. I don't know. Florida State's been good more recently, obviously, than Nebraska, so that changes that conversation a little bit. I don't know if there's a more delusional fan base in college football than Nebraska.
Helpless. I think helpless is the word.
Yeah.
Because there's delusional fan bases everywhere, but there cannot be a fan base that feels more helpless than Nebraska fans. Because every factor that went into them being a college football power when they were a college football power almost doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
The idea of only a select few teams being on national television, of being this big brand that's able to get recruits from California and from Georgia and from Texas. That's all kind of gone out the window with Nebraska when it comes to NIL and where we're at now, the way media covers college football.
That's another place you have to have a Nebraska man also.
Yeah, well, they do.
And they have one, and it hasn't worked.
Yes.
That's why they throw their hands up now and say, I don't know what else you can possibly do other than clean house again and get someone that is on the other end of the spectrum that knows nothing about Nebraska that can come in and mess it all up.
When we come back, I want to talk about Nico Iamaleava. We've been talking about the attorney that allegedly represents him throughout his recruiting process and Michael Caspino and the war of words between he and Florida's NIL collective. But what about Nico Iamaleava? Has the high of Nico's commitment to Tennessee masked some of the Vols' issues in this offseason? We'll tell you what those issues are, and you can join the conversation at 615-737-1045. It's the Buck Reising Show on 104.5 The Zone.
11:03. Good morning. I'm Jonathan Schaefer. The Colorado Avalanche Stanley Cup winners again, the third time in franchise history. This time they did it by defeating the Tampa Bay Lightning 2-1 in Tampa Bay last night in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final. Cole Makar won the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP. Ole Miss scored twice on wild pitches in a 3-run eighth inning. Rebels won their first national baseball title and their first national championship in school history, sweeping Oklahoma in the Men's College World Series Finals with a 4-2 victory. And Chase Elliott won the Ally 400 at Nashville Superspeedway.
Chase Elliott down the backstretch for the final time. A huge lead over Kurt Busch, running in second. Looking for his second win of the 2022 season. He'll get it at Nashville Superspeedway. Chase Elliott wins.
And it was a late night last night as the race was delayed twice due to weather. Major League Baseball Dodgers defeated the Braves 5-3 in 11. For all your foundation repair and waterproofing needs, visit USSTN.com. Breaking news at once. On your home for the Titans and the Vols, this is 104.5 The Zone.
Hour 2, up and running on 104.5 The Zone. Lucas Panzica, Will Bolling with you. Robert Walsh making it happen behind the scenes. A lot of Deshaun Watson news to get to today. We will lead with that at noon. Some developments in the Texans' involvement as well as Watson prepares for his hearing with the NFL tomorrow. But most of the show to this point, we've talked about the drama between Miami and Florida in the battle for Jalen Rashada. The NIL battle more specifically, and how to evaluate head coaches in college football when we don't know what they may or may not be up against in that respect. And I feel like these are very first world problems that we're dealing with in college football, with teams that have $9 million instead of $11 million to spend, right? College football has more first world problems right now in this era than ever.
They do. I have a first world problem in my life right now that I need to get off my chest. Yes, I'm from Brentwood, Tennessee. Let me preface that really quick on the top, so please don't judge me. But Robert Walsh and I have discussed this at length coming into the show because this is apparently a thing. So I in my procrastinating self, have had like an alert in my car that the keyless entry remote in that my car key has, the battery is low. I literally think, Lucas, that this started while I was on the way to one of our high school football broadcasts last fall. So that is how long I have sat in my car. It like beeps at me 4 times when I get in the car. I don't know if anyone else deals with this or if this is a thing, but now I can't get into my car and I have to take the key out of the fob like manually and then open my car by like twisting the key. I might as well just have like a horse-drawn carriage at this point because that's how far back I feel like I've gone in time.
At least yours isn't your fault. Mine is my fault because I jumped into a pool with my keys in my pocket.
Oh, no.
So now every time I try to get in my car, it thinks it's like its anti-theft goes off. It's like, alert. Wrong key.
So
this is my key.
I feel like in the parking garage of my building that there's going to be anti-theft measures for me existing because you like put your hand on the handle and then it like immediately opens. You don't have to like get the key out of your pocket, like all those kind of things. Like technology's crazy. We're living in a crazy world. But now I will like, I'll be like standing there with my hand on the car door and it's like not opening and I'm just waiting. Because typically I can like wait for 30 seconds. I'm like putting my hand like on and off the car. Like sometimes I'll go to the front side, like on the other end, the passenger side to see if that works. And I'll like make eye contact with people and it's like, hey, how are you? Yeah, this is mine. Don't worry. I can't get inside my car, but it's mine. I promise you, like, which is, you know, on the list of things that people trying to hijack a car are going to say is probably number one. Like, oh, yeah, this is my vehicle. I just locked my keys in my car. It's fine. No, I'm just a man holding the handle of my car door for about 90 seconds before it opens. Don't mind me. Go about your day.
Well, most first world problems are very solvable. And Lebowski in the Zone TV chat says, Will, just get a fob battery. My God.
Well, so I watched a YouTube video of how to replace these things, and you have to You have to be a surgeon.
You have to do work.
You have to, well, yeah, but like you have to be a surgeon to like open this little compartment of like the key. Like I don't want to break it and then just have to get a new key. Like I only have one. So I was going to get an oil change and go, like I got my car in Franklin. I live in downtown Nashville. So it's like, okay, let me make the trek, which is so funny that when you move out of one of the suburbs or if you live in one of the suburbs, like going across to one of the other suburbs of Nashville feels like you might as well be traveling to the other end of the earth. Like I feel like I'm driving to the Mediterranean Sea every time I have to cross over Williamson County and go to the other end of Williamson County. It's really not that far. But I was going to go and like get my oil change there and then like, oh, hey, can you like replace this for me? Like, oh, yeah, sure. And then I went like 1,500 miles over when my oil change was supposed to be due, like what the car tells me, not the sticker. So I was like, okay, I have to get this done. And I asked the guy at the quick change place, and they're like, oh, no, we don't do that here. It's like, well, I guess I'm waiting till my next oil change. But
never trust the sticker.
Now I can't. No, the sticker is bogus.
You go like 5,000 miles over the sticker at least.
I went like I went 1 week ago, and the sticker is like, be back in September. Like, absolutely not. Like, I'm not going from football offseason into footballs. Like, I'm going to probably be in the next football offseason. Before I get my oil
stickers, though. Those stickers are gospel because without those stickers, I would have no recollection of the last time I got my oil changes.
Yeah. No,
my car could be sounding like like an old jalopy, and I would have no clue. I'm like, did I do it 4 months ago? 3 weeks ago? I have no idea.
I usually remember just based on like the weather of what it was while I was sitting in my car waiting for like an hour. I don't know. Like I'm always going to remember like, oh, it was like 1,000,000 degrees while I was sitting in my car.
These are most definitely first world problems. Is what we're talking about here with Tennessee a first world problem?
So I think this is we brought this up on Friday talking about the show today. And I think this is not necessarily a first world problem as much as it is a warning sign of Josh Heupel's recruiting ability at Tennessee.
So has the high and the flash of Nico Iamaleava's commitment kind of masked Tennessee's lack of action in the transfer portal in 2022?
I think so. I really do. I don't think it's a major concern at this point, but I think that Tennessee should have had higher expectations for its 2022 transfer portal class. That's where I'm going with this opinion, because you look at some of the names that were on Tennessee's board. Isaiah Nair, wide receiver from Wyoming, commits to Tennessee, ends up signing with Texas a week later. A guy who would have come in and been Tennessee's number 2 receiver behind Cedric Tillman. That one didn't really hurt you that much. Brew McCoy, well-documented, former 5-star that was at USC. A little bit of a checkered past with him that we won't get into right now for the sake of that discussion. But a guy that is going to come in and be Tennessee's number 2 receiver this upcoming season. Jameer Gibbs, running back. Georgia Tech, ends up at Alabama right down the road. That one hurts you. Caden Robinson, wide receiver that's coming from UCF, transfers out of Gus Malzahn's program, a guy that had over 1,000 yards with Josh Heupel, going to Ole Miss. Zach Evans, a guy whose recruitment was very well documented at Tennessee the first time around, ends up signing with TCU, transfers from TCU to Ole Miss, running back, a position that Tennessee could have used some help in after losing bodies at that position over the offseason. MTSU defensive back, Quincy Reilly, a guy that Tennessee really, really wanted. A Tennessee secondary that has a lot of holes that need to be filled by 2 guys who transferred a season ago, Kamal Haddon coming from Auburn and Brandon Turnage coming from Alabama. Those 2 guys have to be really good because MTSU defensive back Quincy Reilly chose Louisville a week after visiting Tennessee back in April. So I think that this is an issue for Tennessee this season because this Tennessee defense was really, really bad at stopping the run specifically last year. They allowed more than 200 rushing yards, 33.6 points per game. Obviously, at edge rusher, you feel good about where Tennessee is right now with Byron Young and Tyler Barron, but losing a Matthew Butler, losing an Alante Taylor, I don't see a plug-and-play replacement at those positions that are upgrades for Tennessee. And when you look at Tennessee on the defensive side of the football, I think they downgraded at every position except edge rusher on defense coming into this season. Like the guys that you saw giving up 400 yards to Purdue in the Music City Bowl, those are your starting defensive backs now. Alante Taylor didn't play in that game. That was ripping off the bandage, so to speak, of what Tennessee is going to look like on defense, with the exception of some freshmen and some junior college guys who we can talk about that are going to be big contributors really, really early on. But I think that the flair and the good and the positive, and it's a big positive, of Tennessee landing Nico Iamaleava has distracted us from a pretty disappointing transfer portal recruiting cycle that Ole Miss crushed, that Alabama crushed, and Tennessee, you're kind of okay.
Well, everybody brings up Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, but I wonder if we do that too often, of putting what Lane Kiffin has done at Ole Miss in the portal this offseason and casting a wide net as the self-dubbed portal king, and we put that next to what Josh Heupel has done. Because philosophically, I feel like it's two different situations, just in the way that they approach the transfer portal. And Kiffin had more to replace. Ole Miss had more to replace from last year to this year than Tennessee. Ole Miss lost its entire stable of wide receivers. The top 3 targets Matt Corral had last season. Obviously, they have to replace their quarterback in Matt Corral. They have to replace their starting running back. There's so much to replace at Ole Miss. And to their credit, they did that. I think Michael Trigg was the most underrated of all those acquisitions, tight end out of USC. That guy, think of Kenny Yeboah a couple years ago from Temple, the amount of targets he got to turn into a draft pick, I believe, with the Jets. I think that's what they want to do with Michael Trigg. So they addressed every position and seemingly knocked it out of the park on almost all of them. It felt like Tennessee came out of, we still got a couple months till the season starts, but the depth of the portal as far as Tennessee's needs are concerned is not great right now. So maybe they'll add in a couple guys. But for the most part, this is their transfer portal class, what we're looking at.
Yeah.
I feel like they're going to come out of it. They're coming out of it 500, so to speak. They didn't really get that much better. I mean, they brought in Brew McCoy, but you lost Velus Jones Jr. You brought in some guys to fill some spots, but nothing to the extent of what Alabama did, being selective, but bringing in instant impact, highly talented player like Jameer Gibbs. Tennessee didn't really have that. They brought in a couple of defensive backs to replace the outgoing guys. Theo Jackson on the way out, Alontae Taylor on the way out. But what are those guys really going to feasibly do for this team? That we don't know. So I'm with you there that it might be easier to point out where Tennessee downgraded than where they upgraded this offseason. And that certainly in and of itself is a concern that we'd probably be talking more about if it wasn't for Nico Iamaleava and his decision to come to Tennessee.
I will say the one guy that I think is a high-impact transfer for Tennessee this year that people aren't really talking about, I think Andre Turntine is a starter for Tennessee this year. Guy that played at Innsworth here locally. We had him on 104.5 The Zone on the Game of the Week a couple of years ago. Coming from Ohio State, can play the star position for Tennessee. That's the biggest question I have, and I want to ask Barrett Sallee this coming up, is that who does Tennessee go to on the defensive side of the football to create its identity in 2022? Because the fast-paced, aggressive defensive style that Tennessee played under Tim Banks in year one, that works with some of the veterans they had. Those veterans are gone. So I'm interested to see kind of the perception from the national point of view that Barrett Sallee has. But what is the perception as Tennessee defense? Because they're going to be relying on some of these transfers to be major contributors this year.
We're going to talk about that with Barrett Sallee and dig a little deeper into what Tennessee did bring in addressing roster needs in the transfer portal. It's the Buck Reising Show on 104.5 The Zone.
Is the summertime heat causing you to lose your cool? Don't let a broken down or older HVAC unit keep you from being comfortable in your home. Hey, it's Buck Reising. I have the heating and cooling company that can take care of all of your HVAC needs. That's Spring Hill Heating and Cooling. With over 20 years of experience serving all of southern Middle Tennessee, Spring Hill Heating and Cooling is a family-owned and operated company that prides itself on outstanding customer service. Spring Hill Heating and Cooling offers cost-effective solutions, such as a free service call with their repairs, plus low monthly payments on those repairs. And if you do need a new unit, Spring Hill Heating and Cooling offers 60-month no-interest financing. Plus, they can provide the financing for qualifying purchase and free estimates on replacement systems. They also back their work with 10-year parts and labor warranties. When summer is at its hottest, they are at their best. Spring Hill Heating and Cooling, with 2 locations to serve you, Columbia and Lyles, and available anytime at springhillac.com.
The Buck Reising Show is powered by Spring Hill Heating and Cooling. Go to springhillac.com.
Yes, it is. Lucas Panzica Will Bolling with you as Buck Reising finishes out the last day of his long weekend. He'll be back here tomorrow at 10. Barrett Sallee of CBS Sports joins us now. Barrett, hope you're doing well. I'm sitting next to one massive Braves fan in the studio right now in Will Bolling, and now we're talking to another one. So I wonder what the over-under is on tears shed between you and Will Bolling over the course of the weekend.
Oh, dude. Friday night, Freddie's a crier. I think we all knew Freddie was going to cry, but, man, it was hard not to get wrapped up. It got really, really dusty in our house on Friday night, and, it was good to see him get his ring. I wish he hadn't had that kind of success against us all weekend, but it was an emotional weekend. There's no doubt.
And Barrett, I feel like this is the perfect way to start a segment talking about SEC football, considering that probably half the fan bases in the SEC had fans who were a little misty-eyed on Friday night. But I loved what Chip Carey said in that moment, saying, there is crying in baseball today in Atlanta, Georgia. I thought that was pretty perfect.
It's true. There was not a dry eye in that building, not a dry eye in our house. I think it shows just how much of an impact Freddie had, coming up, early success, being the cornerstone through the rebuilding process and ending it last year, in a storybook way. So, yeah, there's crying in baseball. I think that's okay. I think Freddie's emotions and the things that he said certainly speak volumes about what the organization, the city, the fans mean to him and will continue to mean to him for the duration of his career.
Typically, when you have that type of return, it's boos, right? So I've never seen that emotional of a comeback with the player coming back to play against his former team with his new team. And it was cool to see. As a neutral, as a non-Braves fan, it was cool to see the emotion there. It's why you love sports. A lot of emotion going on in Gainesville right now, too, Barrett. Different type of emotion because Florida fans are going nuts here after this commitment of Jaden Rashada, the four-star quarterback from California, commits to Miami over Florida, and you have reports from On3 Sports as his lawyer directly tells On3 that he turned down $11 million from Florida to take $9.5 million from Miami. Now Gator Collective in Gainesville saying we have nothing to do with this lawyer. We won't speak to him. We don't like his tactics. Florida fans are up in arms, whether they're frustrated at Billy Napier or they're frustrated at everything about the way Florida is going about name, image, and likeness. My question is, in this new era, do we need to reconsider how we evaluate head coaches at recruiters, given that we don't know what NIL advantages they may or may not have?
Yeah, I think there's something to that, but I also think there's so much plausible deniability with that needs to be built in for recruiting that, the Gator Collective's certainly going to say that. But to me, the thing that jumped out, my first reaction was, what the hell is this lawyer doing? Like, he's basically saying that he cheated, like that he got an offer for his client to go to Miami and go to Florida. He's basically throwing both programs under the bus. And that to me is the most shocking thing. And, I've heard the numbers are not nearly what they're supposed to be, which again goes to the point where it looks like this lawyer's out for himself. He wants to get more clients, so he's going to inflate the numbers. And I've heard they're not even close to what he said in that story. But it's weird to me that somebody that would be in his position in that line of work would go on the record like that. I don't understand the reasoning behind it. Now, yeah, we're going to have to reevaluate how we go about evaluating recruiters and programs and collectives and things like that. But, it's still a new process. And, I think right now, these people are kind of drunk with power, and they're certainly using it. And players are shopping for the best deal. There's no doubt.
Barrett, we're learning a lot about the authority or lack thereof that the NCAA has in these situations and in NIL. But what kind of authority does the NCAA have over one guy, over the Michael Caspinos of the world? Can these guys just say whatever they want, knowing that there's no way they can be disciplined for these things?
Yeah, pretty much. I think the one thing about, how this is sort of shaken out is that a lot of these schools and collectives and lawyers, they're not scared of the NCAA because they know, and this is the case same with Jimbo and the Saban squabble, that if as long as they're abiding by state rules, they're going to be fine. And if the NCAA tries to do something to them, then they're going to sue. And that's not just the lawyers, it's the collectives, and it's the schools themselves. I mean, let's just say Miami, the collective did give Rashad $9 million or whatever. If the NCAA comes back and says, well, you can't do that, we're going to punish you, then Miami's going to look at them and say, no, we followed our state laws. You know, you can't do that to us. You have no jurisdiction. So, you know, it's just a giant mess like that. And so they do have free reign, and it's not just the lawyers. It's essentially everybody until, you know, the NCAA puts some guardrails in. But at this point, I think it's too late because, you know, you already have certain states and certain organizations operating within their state's laws in a way that others can't. And really, that's the genesis of the whole Saban-Jimbo squabble from a month and a half ago, too.
Right, absolutely. And we were talking about this earlier, saying that perception is kind of reality, fair or unfair, within the NIL world. And as soon as an 18-year-old hears that one school doesn't know how to do NIL, then they're perhaps less likely to look at that school down the road. How much does this affect the pressure on Billy Napier to win right away in year one? Because we were talking about this earlier, too, that Tennessee-Florida game gets a little bit more interesting because I feel like one fan base is going to be probably spiraling a little bit earlier than they should, depending on who loses that game.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly going to be it's going to be a big one. I don't think there's a ton of pressure on Billy Napier. I think, like, look, the idea that somehow, you know, he could be under pressure because of this, I think is a little ridiculous.
Right.
He's got a talent issue. He's got a depth issue. There's no way that any rational Florida fan or administrator, Scott Strickland, you know, in particular, would risk setting the program back again. And so Napier is going to get the benefit of the doubt. And if they lose to Tennessee, I mean, look, they're going to be upset in Florida. You know, you don't want to lose to a rival, but Tennessee's going to be really good. So, you know, I don't necessarily think it's the end of the world. But there's a lot of pressure on Billy, I think, to revitalize that roster in an era where there are so many uncertainties. And I think that's why they're frustrated, is that the Florida law allows, you know, University of Florida to have advantages that colleges in other states don't have, but they're not using it as well as maybe, you know, Florida State and Miami. So that from that end, you know, they have to rebuild the roster, and they're not doing it in a way that lends to a quick turnaround. But that can change with the transfer portal and a bunch of other things really quickly.
But that is in the short term, Barrett, where we can look at Billy Napier and what he's being able to accomplish on the recruiting trail with a grain of salt, right? If he doesn't have those advantages that a Miami might have down the road as far as pushing all those resources to the middle of the table.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is absolutely a way to judge him. I just don't think it's necessarily appropriate to do it right now, just because, again, like, we're all sort of new at this, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think any of us thought these collectives would be a thing. I don't think anybody thought that these schools would be so brazen about using this as a recruiting tactic, even though we all knew they would. It doesn't seem like anybody cares, you know? So I think we're all sort of new at this and trying to figure it out on the fly.
Barrett Sallee with us of CBS Sports on 104.5 The Zone. Barrett, we're about a year in. I think it's Friday that will mark, I guess, the anniversary of NIL coming into college football. So we're a year into this era where the transfer portal and NIL have coexisted. And it's been interesting to watch certain head coaches and the way that they utilize it differently, whether it's portal king Lane Kiffin bringing in everyone he can, or a team like Georgia having the luxury to pretty much stand pat and not make any moves of note. When you look at the SEC in this offseason, which program has been the most impressive to you in the way they've gone about bringing in the right talent at the right spots?
I mean, yeah, it's still Alabama to me because, you know, I think Nick Saban looks at the transfer portal and uses it as sort of a way to call up players from a farm system. You know, Jamison Williams was the fourth best wide receiver at Ohio State 2 years ago. He makes him a superstar at Alabama because they needed it. This year they don't have a running back to replace Brian Robinson. So they go out and get Jameer Gibbs from Tech, a guy who's done a great job, you know, so far during his college career. They need another wide receiver. They go pluck one from Georgia and Jermaine Burton 3 days after the national championship. So, you know, you can sit here and say quantity over quality or whatever. And certainly, you know, Lane Kiffin has done both at Ole Miss. But I think the ability for Alabama and Nick Saban to say, okay, Henry To'oTo'o, superstar, you're coming with us. Jermaine Burton, you're coming with us. Like that's just like ninja type stuff. And Nick has done a great job of forming that plan in conjunction with his high school recruiting in a way that I think, other coaches aren't able to match and will not be able to match until Nick's gone.
Barrett Sallee with us here on 104.5 The Zone. Barrett, I have the opinion that Nico Iamaleava's commitment to Tennessee has kind of overshadowed a lot of the disappointment that they had in the transfer portal this spring, and swinging and missing at some of those guys you mentioned that are headed to Alabama, but some other ones. Caden Robinson, a former UCF receiver who's headed to Ole Miss. Zach Evans, another guy headed to Ole Miss that they were in for. Do you feel like that's the case, that the 2023 class has kind of overshadowed a little bit of an underwhelming spring and summer for Josh Heupel?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's been, they could have been the portal king, so to speak, or at least we're trying to be, one of those that, makes a big impact. But is it the end of the world? No, you can still, the roster at Tennessee is fine, and so going out and getting Zach Evans would have been great. Is it really necessary? Probably not. Is going out and getting a couple wide receivers to go alongside Cedric Tillman? Yeah, you could use that, but I think Josh Heupel knows that his Isaiah Nayer's a good player and Robinson's a good player, but there's still dudes on that roster he can work with. So I think it was more just for a depth perspective. There's not any immediate need, which is a reason I think a lot of those players didn't go to Tennessee. I mean, I think Zach Evans went to Ole Miss to rush for 1,500 yards. I don't necessarily know if he'd have gotten the chance at Tennessee. Nayer went to Texas to play alongside Worthy and be in a ultra-dynamic offense. He had that opportunity at Tennessee, but there are a lot of other, fish in that pond in that wide receivers room. So a little disappointing, yeah. Is it the end of the world? No, I think Josh is still sort of figuring out how to sell that program, both to high schoolers and to transfers. And, so far he's done a good job. Maybe not as good as he could have, but that's okay.
Barrett, the Auburn situation is fascinating to me going into this season, and it feels like the Brian Harsin drama of the offseason was about 4 or 5 major college football news cycles ago, but it's still very much a really interesting conversation heading into the season. How hot is his seat going into week 1, and how hot does it get if Auburn loses to LSU at home this year?
It's really high. You're right. It does seem like it's 4 or 5 years ago when that happened. I mean, that was a wild week. But yeah, I mean, it's super hot. I think there's a reason those boosters wanted him gone, and to his credit, he fought, and I think that he's been told to address some of the issues that rubbed them the wrong way. I don't necessarily know if he's had the chance to prove that he has changed one way or the other. And I think if he goes about business the same way he did last year from a personality standpoint, from a communication standpoint, then yeah, he's going to get fired if they struggle. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But if he, addresses some of the issues that people had with him, both from a recruiting standpoint and from a personality standpoint, then and is mildly successful, then I think he'll be all right. But there's no doubt it's a big year. Having Penn State in week 3 is, I think, an enormous game for him. There's a 5-game stretch in the middle of the season that is just absolutely brutal. So I think he's on the hottest seat in the SEC, maybe even the country, and he's just going to have to give those people that formed a coup against him something to have faith in. And I think a lot of that is going to come off the field, in private communications and things that happen behind closed doors that we don't get to see. Certainly he's got to win on the field, but I think it's more about off the field stuff.
Everything you just said is about a coach going into a second season.
It's incredible.
I mean, it really is amazing.
It is.
Another guy going into a second season that certainly doesn't have the pressure that a Brian Harsin has is Steve Sarkisian at Texas, Barrett. And I thought he was a guy before Arch Manning's announcement last week that if things kind of snowballed a little bit in 2022 like they did last season, maybe not even a 5-7, if they got off to a good start and then lost some games down the stretch to teams they shouldn't and end up going 6-6, I thought the pressure would have been crazy high on Steve Sarkisian, and maybe there would have been even shouts to just hit the reset button. It's Texas. I mean, anything is possible. But now, with the commitment of Arch Manning, does it feel like that has lifted some of the short-term pressure on Steve Sarkisian and given him a lifeline, at least for the next 1 or 2 seasons, in that you're not really going to put a ton of pressure or fire the guy that is bringing in Arch Manning in 2 years.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Unless they go 3-9 this year or something like that, he's staying. Because you're right, it's not just Arch Manning. He's going to be the catalyst for a pretty substantial recruiting run over the next 3-4 months. Because kids are the best recruiters. It's not coaches, it's not head coaches or whatever. It's the kids themselves. So Arch is going to, be the sort of catalyst for that. So yeah, unless there's a complete disaster, and I don't really foresee that happening with Texas. I know folks like to pick on Texas, and I get that, but that offense is going to be a lot of fun this year. So I don't think there'll be a huge disaster. And if they go 6-6, 7-5, whatever, there's no reason to risk losing what will be a good class, a really good class with a generational type quarterback. So yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I think maybe before all this, especially if he didn't get Arch, and the natives got restless again, he'd be gone. But right now, I think he's pretty safe.
As of today, when does Arch Manning, what season does he take his first snap in the SEC in?
Oh, man. Now I think it's 2025. It wouldn't surprise me if it's 24, but I think they're going to go all the way through with it. If you're the Big 12, why let them go at this point? You have, essentially a super conference for a couple of years when everybody the newbies jump in. Why let them go? I mean, why would you not let Houston and Texas play in the first game? Why not let Oklahoma and UCF play a couple times? I think that there's some reason to be excited about that. So I don't think they let them go early.
Barrett Sallee, CBS Sports. Appreciate the time, Barrett. Looking forward to seeing what you got coming up at Barrett Sallee on Twitter, and looking forward to 9 weeks from now when we're talking about Labor Day weekend and week 1 of the college football season. Appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, guys. Thanks. Anytime.
Appreciate it.
Barrett Sallee, CBS Sports, 2025. That's his shot.
Man, that's a lifetime away.
Yeah, I did Forklift Systems Football Saturday with Coach Doug Matthews Saturday. Tony Barnhart joins every week. Tony Barnhart is set on 2024.
Really?
He is set on 2024.
I feel like I am too. I feel like it doesn't matter what the Big 12 is going to want to do at that point, that the SEC and their lawyers and their people are going to find a way to make sure it's 2024.
You've also got Bowlesby, the Big 12 commissioner, stepping down. He was really the one that was so staunchly against, Oklahoma and Texas will not leave before the expiration of their contract. Who knows what dominoes will fall once he is replaced. But coming up, we're going to focus in a little more on Tennessee's portal class. Barrett Sallee says not to worry. We're going to dive into it coming up next. It's the Buck Reising Show on 104.5 The Zone. Welcome back. It's the Buck Reising Show on 104.5 The Zone. Had a great chat with Barrett Sallee of CBS Sports, just trying to unpack some of the stuff that we've seen these last couple of weeks in the college football offseason. You know, our guy Josh Pate, Late Kick Josh on 247 Sports and CBS Sports, doesn't like to use the word offseason. It's like he has to censor it whenever he says it. He whispers it.
It's like Michigan fans with the O. Whenever he tweets it out, he puts the red X at the beginning of it in order to never say the word offseason.
I disagree with that. I think the college football offseason is a beautiful thing. I think it's okay to recognize the offseason and embrace it for what it is.
Many would say it is more unpredictable and more entertaining than the regular season, or at least the postseason. I mean, the regular season can be fun sometimes, but the postseason is largely boring in college football. It's fair.
Yeah, I liked what you said off the top, that the transfer portal and NIL for, obviously there's a lot of negatives. There's a lot of positives too. Players that haven't been getting the money that they've brought to universities for decades and decades are seeing a piece of that pie now. That's all good. But it has brought, like you said, some unpredictability to a very predictable sport. I do like that element of it.
Short term and long term. I mean, in the short term, it's given us something that we have no idea how it's going to work next week versus how it's worked the week before. It's given us these crazy recruiting stories now with Florida that we've talked about at length today with Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban, something that would never have happened, obviously, under the former model of amateurism, quote unquote. I use the most sarcastic air quotes possible for that, talking about college football. But I think long term, it gives us the unpredictability of programs like Tennessee and Miami having a clear path back to relevance within college football. So short term and long term, I think it makes things a lot more interesting.
So as we examine what Tennessee did in the portal, and we were talking about at the top of the hour, did the commitment of Nico Iamaleava maybe mask the lack of action from Tennessee in the transfer portal? My main question is it easier to point out where Tennessee got worse on its roster than it is to point out where they got better over the course of the offseason?
Absolutely.
615-737-1045 if you want to chime in. Looking at outgoing and incoming transfers, we'll look at who came in. Gerald Mincey comes in from Florida to help out on the offensive line. Some important depth there. Brew McCoy, we've mentioned, probably the most high-profile one, former five-star receiver from USC. Not much college football experience to speak of, but certainly talent. Charlie Browder from USC, the tight end, or UCF, excuse me, the tight end that I had completely forgotten about. Linebacker Jackson Hanna from Nebraska. That's right, former local guy.
Yep.
And then the two safeties, Wesley Walker from Georgia Tech, Andre Turntine from Ohio State.
One of those two guys is your starting star defensive back this season in the nickel, because that's sort of a hybrid safety and cornerback position. I think Andre Turntine ends up starting at that position this season because Tennessee is going to have its most experienced playmaker on defense at that position, the position that saw Theo Jackson go from be a starter, decent player to being a draft pick and now a Tennessee Titan.
When you look at who Tennessee lost, that's just as important, right? Because you don't have the high-profile names exiting with a coaching change like a Henry To'oTo'o. But Aaron Willis, former four-star linebacker, transfers out to Houston. Julian Nixon, a former four-star receiver that converted to tight end, never really cracked the rotation. He's in the portal, doesn't have a destination. Cornerback Tyus Fields in the portal, doesn't have a destination. Linebacker Morvin Joseph, former four-star prospect, transfers to FAU. Anderson Kobe, former JUCO receiver, transfers to Indiana. Kayron Calbert, offensive lineman, transfers to Eastern Kentucky. You don't have, like I said, any big names like To'oTo'o where you think, man, that's a big hit. But the outgoing guys this year did kind of chip away at Tennessee's depth a little bit. And I don't think that this roster is in a spot where it can say, we don't need that guy, and we don't need that guy, we don't need that guy, we don't need that guy. You still need depth. And I'm sorry, losing Morvin Joseph and Aaron Willis, whether or not they were a cultural fit with Josh Heupel, I don't know, but you still lose that depth in your linebacking core, which was a bit of a weakness for Tennessee last season, contributed by the Juwan Mitchell injury. But the attrition hasn't been that positive to me for Tennessee's roster when it comes to the depth, those second and third teamers, especially on defense.
And especially the fact that they just don't have the luxury of losing anyone, like you mentioned. I mean, this team is still recovering from a mass exodus under Jeremy Pruitt, where if Tennessee makes a hire the day after the loss to Texas A&M to finish the 2020 season, and they, forego the bowl game. They had the COVID situation like that. Josh Heupel has more of a chance to bring in guys in the transfer portal and bring in a solid opening class to start his tenure at Tennessee. He didn't have that luxury. That was the negative of Tennessee waiting as long as it did to handle its business by firing Jeremy Pruitt and unpacking that entire NCAA violation situation that we still don't have an end to and probably won't for another season. Tennessee really needed to get another starter, I think, on defense within the portal, because I think specifically in the secondary, losing one corner is one too many for them at that position. I mean, we're looking at a two deep that is pretty soon going to have walk-ons on it if Tennessee has any injuries of significance this season. And then you're talking about probably moving some of your veteran safeties, a Trayvon Flowers, a Jalen McCullough, around to corner in order to cover for the lack of corners that you had. The margin for error for Tennessee on defense is razor thin, and I think the aggressive style of defense that Tim Banks wants to play on that side of the ball, I don't think it happens as smoothly this season without Alontae Taylor and Theo Jackson and Matthew Butler. Juwan Mitchell is back at inside linebacker. That's a big boost for them. I think they needed another linebacker to replace Aaron Willis. They don't end up getting that. They still have some more good names at that position. But at cornerback, that's just a position where you have to be really, really good and really deep in the SEC, and Tennessee just isn't. And it comes down to, can you win one-on-one on the outside with somebody's best receiver in the SEC? There are a lot of best receivers on bad SEC teams that are going to beat Tennessee consistently. We saw Jalen Tolbert do it for South Alabama last year in Tennessee's homecoming game. It's just going to be a fact of the story of Tennessee's season this year, is that your number one receiver is going to have a good day, because I don't know who Tennessee's number one cornerback is.
Tim Banks, Tennessee defensive coordinator, joined the Buck Reising Show in early May and was asked about this, about the defensive back room and the progress there after spring football with so much to replace, whether it's Alontae Taylor drafted in the second round by the Saints, it's Theo Jackson drafted late by the Tennessee Titans. Here was Tim Banks' response on the progress of that room.
Yeah, I thought it was good. Obviously, we're losing, what we thought was some really impactful players. And, we got some guys coming back that, are going to take on bigger roles. And I know they're excited about the challenge, as we are as a defensive staff. So I thought for the most part we stayed healthy coming out of the spring, which was obviously the number one priority. But I also thought that, the kids that, were kind of new to the system, who had not played a lot of snaps, prior to the spring, I thought as the spring went on, those guys got tremendously better. And, we're anxious to see, what kind of steps they take in the summer to get ready for fall.
You said Tennessee has improved. The one spot that you can look at tangibly and say they beefed up here, depth-wise, top-end talent, whatever it might be, you said the pass rush.
Probably. I mean, that's about the only place you can look at, because they didn't lose their two best players.
Well, you're going to need it because, like you said, this defensive backfield, it just hasn't really gotten better. And look, Andre Turntine and Wesley Walker could come in and they could salvage this portal class and this defensive backfield with that depth. But you're right. What it looked like in the Music City Bowl against Purdue was the snapshot image of what your defensive backfield looks like in 2022. Best way to offset a struggling defensive backfield, getting to the quarterback.
Yeah.
And Tennessee brings back Tyler Barron, and that one was a close call.
It was.
Who entered the portal and comes back.
Yeah.
Bring back Byron Young. You add a couple of 4-star pass rushers in the most recent recruiting class in James Pierce and in Joshua Joseph. So you can certainly say the depth improved there. Missed out on a guy like Jared Verse, who transferred from Albany to Florida State. The depth has improved, and they're going to need every bit of it if this defense doesn't want to regress in year two of the Tim Banks era.
Yeah, and they need D. Williams, their big JUCO cornerback commitment, to be the number one corner on this team, because I don't think Warren Burrell is a number one corner in the SEC. I think he can take a step forward and be a solid number two guy. I think he was pretty good at times for Tennessee a season ago, playing that aggressive style of defense. But Tennessee's pass rush has to be among the best of the SEC to give a young secondary a chance. And you've got two veteran safeties, like we mentioned, and Flowers and McCullough, that are going to help that team tremendously. I just don't see the skill at the cornerback position, a place where I think you've got to have as much talent and as much depth at that position as any other position within your defense. I think that's the most important defensive position in the SEC, considering how good wide receiver play is in that conference at your biggest rivals, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. I just think Tennessee takes a step back defensively this season.
Brandon Rushing in the Zone TV chat says, going to be another year of forcing turnovers and sacks, not going to be able to cover elite SEC wide receivers. When we come back, we'll cover one important development in the case of quarterback Deshaun Watson. New lawsuits are out, but not necessarily against Watson himself ahead of his hearing tomorrow with the NFL. We'll tell you what that is coming up next. It's Hour 3 of the Buck Reising Show on 104.5 The Zone.
It is 12:03. Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Schaefer. The Colorado Avalanche made history last night.
5 seconds to go. Up it comes to the line. Colorado has won the Stanley Cup.
And they won the Stanley Cup for the third time in their existence, defeating the Lightning in Tampa Bay 2-1 to win the series 4-2. Cole Makar won the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP. Ole Miss scored twice on wild pitches in a 3-run eighth inning as the Rebels won their first national baseball title, sweeping Oklahoma in the Men's College World Series Finals with a 4-2 victory on Sunday. It is their first national championship in any sport in the school's history. Chase Elliott won the Ally 400 at National Superspeedway. The race was delayed twice due to weather for Elliott. Second victory of the season for him on the Cup Series. And the Dodgers defeated the Braves yesterday 5-3 in 11. For all your foundation repair and waterproofing needs, visit USSTN.com. Breaking news at once on your home for the Titans and the Vols. This is 104.5 The Zone.
Hour number 3. Let's finish it out on this Monday. I don't know what that was. There's no one else in the studio here with us. Lucas Panzica, Will Bolling with you until 1 o'clock. Robert Walsh on the other side of the glass. I don't think we're going to let Buck Reising back in here.
No.
He waited too long.
It's a hostile takeover of the hostile variety.
615-737-1045 to join in on the conversation. Of course, we see you in the Zone TV chat, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. It has gotten exhausting, Will, when we've started segments or hours with, there's been a development in the case of Deshaun Watson because it has turned into a lot of deja vu and repeating that another lawsuit has been filed or Watson spoke on this matter. Anytime he meets with the media now, it's just this huge media scrum. The latest, though, is a little bit different because we're involving the Texans now. Tony Busby has filed the first lawsuit against the Houston Texans stemming from the Deshaun Watson case. And here's part of the statement from Tony Busby, who, of course, also represents all 20-plus of the women that had levied civil suits against Watson. And now 4 of those remain, as he has reportedly settled 20 of the 24. Busby said, "Today we filed the first case of what will likely be many against the Houston Texans related to Deshaun Watson's behavior. Suffice it to say, the overwhelming evidence collected indicating that the Houston Texans enabled Watson's behavior is incredibly damning. We believe the Texans knew or most certainly should have known of Watson's conduct. Beyond that, we believe the filing speaks for itself." End quote. And this comes the day before Watson is set to meet with Sue Robinson, the NFL and NFLPA joint disciplinary officer, to find out what his suspension will be for 2022.
It's Groundhog Day.
Yep.
Deshaun Watson news. I hate to trivialize something that is serious and that is unfortunate for the women involved in this, but there's something every week right now. There has been really for most of the last year, maybe not weekly, but monthly updates to this story. I mean, the money situation of this is not ideal, obviously, for the Cleveland Browns. And if you could pick one guy to not be the one to get the first fully guaranteed contract in NFL history, this would be the guy. Makes no sense. Granted, the base salary for Deshaun Watson in 2022 is $1 million. That's it. So his cap hit jumps from $10 million in 2022 to $54.9 million in 2023. And essentially the contract situations work out that if he doesn't play this year, everything gets kicked down 1 year. And basically his $1 million paycheck for 1 year would take effect in 2023, which is when his agreement would then technically begin. But if he's paid for, if he's suspended for a little bit of the season, that's going to be interesting to see. So his contract provided for $45 million guaranteed signing bonus. The language in that agreement indicates that bonus is not forfeited. So he could receive the full amount this year even if he gets suspended, or $9 million if the bonus is prorated across 5 years. Either way, the Browns at least have a little bit of grace this season to figure out something and not have a very big cap hit for Deshaun Watson in 2022, even if he's suspended, let's say, for half the season, which it doesn't look like is going to be the case. But it looks like the Jacoby Brissett show, which is wild to me that this guy, also Groundhog Day, Jacoby Brissett has signed a 1-year deal with insert middle-of-the-road NFL team here.
Yeah, this lawsuit is different because it is one of the 4 women that still have a civil lawsuit against him, not one of the 20 that have settled with him. But now the Texans are just getting dragged into the muck of this thing because one of these 4 women has a civil suit against Watson and now also has one against the Houston Texans. I want to read this part because there's a lot of language here in the lawsuit, but just this excerpt from the lawsuit. Despite having a full training staff available to him with the Texans, and despite having the services of a specified massage therapy entity, Genuine Touch, available to him, Deshaun Watson refused to have massages done at the Texans stadium and instead preferred to reach out to strangers on Instagram for massages. The Texans were well aware of Watson's preference. In fact, as early as June 2020, the owner of Genuine Touch, the massage therapy entity used by the Texans, her name Joni Hahn, Joni Hahn complained to the Texans that Watson was seeking out unqualified strangers for massages via Instagram. Her stated concern to the Texans was that Watson was putting himself in danger of contracting COVID or getting himself sued. One of those things happened.
It did. I mean, the deeper you dig into this thing, the worse it's going to get until every party in this settles. That's really what we're looking for at this point. And I don't think this is a money grab either, because you have 34 people saying one thing that are pretty much in lockstep of this is what happened. This was my experience, when 34 different cases are the same. Obviously, there's something there. This is not a financial thing, but give Tony Busby credit. The guy is going after the maximum on all fronts. And the timing of this obviously can't be underestimated either, that all of this is once again coming out the day before Deshaun Watson is going to learn his fate from the NFL.
Might be earlier. Chris Plank joined J. Mart and Ramon earlier this morning. Ramon out this week, was J. Mart and Rhett Bryant. Chris Plank of the Sooner Radio Network and Fox Sports Radio talking about how there could potentially be an earlier solution to Deshaun Watson's suspension as it pertains to the NFL's decision. This was Chris Plank earlier this morning.
I don't think this is going to end up getting to the arbitrator. I think they're going to settle. I think something's going to happen either, later today or overnight, or we'll wake up tomorrow morning on your show to it, guys, because I think Deshaun Watson in his camp has shown that we want to show this mindset that we want to fight publicly, but then when push comes to shove, we realize we're not going to win. So let's just go ahead and settle these cases and maybe take their 1-year ban.
What's your reaction to that?
I think at this point, if Deshaun Watson and his team can guarantee a 1-year ban, they're going to take it. Because I think now the NFL is looking towards an indefinite suspension. That seems to be the report from Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, those that are in the know about this from the NFL's point of view. If Deshaun Watson's camp can guarantee a year, that might very well be the case. I think it's a good point that if they have a certain number in mind, because an indefinite suspension can become a many number of things. An indefinite suspension can be a 2-year ban. It could be more than that. It could be the length of the contract. I don't think it's going to get to that point. I think ultimately it would become, hey, you settle these cases, you go through the proper steps, don't make any more mistakes. Maybe you're back at a year and a half. And from there, we give you a definitive number of 2023 at that point. But I think we're looking at least a year. And the indefinite word is probably the one that makes Deshaun Watson's camp the most uncomfortable at this point.
Yeah, so let's just go with the 17 games and move on.
I think so.
At this point, if the NFL levied anything less than a full season, with all the new information that's come out about this, and now the latest, the Texans massage therapy entity, the owner of it, expressing concern to the team that their franchise quarterback is reaching out to unqualified strangers on social media, and just more and more you see women that are giving their accounts that have not filed civil suits, that don't have any monetary gain on the table here, but are still giving their accounts that are right in line with what you have seen with the 20-plus women that did file civil suits. And my favorite argument to this is, well, 2 grand juries found him innocent, so
right.
why should he miss any games? they just didn't see enough evidence to pursue criminal charges. Let's not get confused between what it takes to pursue criminal charges in front of a grand jury versus what it takes for the NFL to think you're in violation of the league's personal conduct policy. There is a wide gap in those two things.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I think it's totally true that the NFL has to have a different burden of proof and a different list of guidelines in order to change somebody's fate in the way, that they can represent their league and a team. I think on top of that too, though, the indefinite suspension makes sense for the NFL because so many new people and so many updates have happened in this case that it's almost like the NFL is pausing the clock on the suspension for a year and saying, if nothing else new comes from this over the course of a year, then you're going to get a 1-year suspension the next season. I think that's the most realistic possibility at this point because so much has happened over the course of this past year where you have 34 different people who have come forward in this. When this first started, it was what? 1 or 2. Then, it catches fire a little bit. Okay, we're up to 4 or 6. Like, that's when I say that this story is developed every single month. We didn't just get to 34 over 1 or 2 different press releases and different lawsuits. This took us a year to get to 34 different women who are within this lawsuit and within this situation ever since Deshaun Watson had already requested a trade. And then, it kind of put all of that situation on pause. I think the NFL at this point is saying, if nothing else comes out of this and we learn nothing else over the course of a year, then, all right, we're going to give you a year suspension, but let's give you a year to sit here and see if this number becomes 50 over the course of the next 52 weeks.
Everything has pointed to a full season suspension.
Absolutely.
All the reporting, everything you heard there from Plank, from the NFLPA's concerns, everything has pointed to a full season suspension. If that's the case, and we fast forward to the 2023 season, Deshaun Watson will be the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. As we said, contract would essentially get pushed back a year, beginning the highest guaranteed contract in NFL history after not having played a snap in 3 years. He'll be 28 at that point. He'll be about 20. He'll be 28 September 14th of 2023.
And is still better than any other option the Cleveland Browns would have somehow. But yeah.
And then you've got Michael Balco reporting on Twitter that he's hearing Seahawks and Browns are nearing a trade agreement that could send Baker Mayfield to Seattle. It would be so fascinating to see the Browns, who make this big push, be stuck with Jacoby Brissett for 17 games, with Josh Dobbs as your backup, and just move forward and try to get into the playoffs? I mean, how do you even?
Well, it's interesting because at that point you either have to trust that Deshaun Watson is the guy or suck badly enough to get the draft picks in order to either pick your future franchise quarterback if Deshaun isn't the guy, or surround a guy like Jacoby Brissett with enough playmakers where he has no choice but to be good. And they have playmakers on that team this year. I mean, they have Amari Cooper. They've got weapons on offense. They've got one of the best players on the defensive side of the football, Myles Garrett. I mean, they've got some guys. They don't have enough guys to, I think, take Jacoby Brissett to the postseason with how good the AFC North is now, and the Steelers now with renewed confidence and them having a new quarterback this season. But AFC North is fascinating. You got the Lamar stuff. You've got the Browns without Deshaun Watson. You've got the Bengals trying to come back as a contender where they've never been really doing that in a really long time. And, then you've just got the Steelers there who have always been good, now have a rookie quarterback.
It is fascinating. And I'm surprised. It's a conversation for another day. I'm surprised it's taken this long to see tangible trade rumors about Baker Mayfield popping to the surface, especially as it pertains to Seattle, because I'm just confused by what's happening right now in the Pacific Northwest and Seattle, Washington, with Pete Carroll as the head coach and Geno Smith and Drew Lock allegedly battling it out for their starting job. If you've got Geno Smith and Drew Lock as your two options at quarterback, you're tanking. You cannot convince me of anything else.
There is no doubt.
Conversation for another day. Conversation we're going to have coming up next. Which Titans rookie do you have the highest hopes for in the short term in 2022? Maybe that's changed with everything you've seen from Treylon Burks and OTAs and throughout minicamp. But of all the rookies taken by the Titans in the 2022 NFL draft, who do you have the highest hope for come week 1 of the 2022 Titans season? We'll be right back. It's the Buck Reising Show on 104.5 The Zone.
Let me tell you about my friend Gary Ashton and the Ashton Real Estate Group of RE/MAX Advantage. Gary is the don't sell without the intel guy. So people ask him all kinds of questions, including, what's it like to work in real estate? Well, if you're looking for a great career, I know 3 reasons why you should join the Gary Ashton team as soon as possible. 1, success. The Ashton team was just named the top RE/MAX team, not just in Nashville, but in the entire world. 2, trust. Nashvillians like me trust Gary's team because they live here, they love it here, and they offer careers with unlimited potential. 3, community. The Gary Ashton team sponsors both the Titans and the Preds, and they were just recognized as the #1 donation source for the Children's Miracle Network. Bottom line, the Gary Ashton team added 65 new agents last year, and they want you to join the team this year. So don't sell without the intel, and if you're looking for a great career, the Gary Ashton team wants you in 2022. Call the Gary Ashton team with RE/MAX Advantage today at 615-301-1650 or visit GaryAshton.com.
The Buck Reising Show is powered by Spring Hill Heating and Cooling. Go to springhillac.com.
Yes, it is. 2 segments to go on this Monday. Lucas Panzica with you. Will Bolling accompanying me as Robert Walsh makes it happen. Puka in the Zone TV chat says, take a photo of Buck wanting in tomorrow. Lebowski wants us to take a picture of Buck pressing his face against the window.
All right, over-under on Buck's arrival time tomorrow off of vacation. I'm going to set the over-under at 9:55 a.m.
Oh, buddy, that's when you say over is later, right? Under is earlier. Yeah. Oh, take the over on
really?
That. Oh, yeah.
9:55?
9:59:30.
See, I think he's going to be nervous about what transpired when he was gone.
Oh, so get here early?
So he's going to get here early.
That's a good point. Maybe Wednesday is the day that he's going to get like comfortable and really feel the effects of vacation.
And then he's leaving Thursday.
I love the picture that he took. Yeah, it's true. I love the picture like he posted from like the mountains. He had like 3 humble brags in the same tweet. It was a, hey, I'm on vacation. It was a, hey, my girlfriend's in this picture. 3, there's a hot tub in this picture. So 3. And then B, like, oh, look at this very nice cabin. I almost responded that to him and said, like, let's pace ourselves on humble brags per tweet.
And then he called me yesterday. And I said, what the hell are you doing calling me on your vacation? He said, we came back. Came back a day early.
Why?
Got antsy. Some people are not capable of vacationing.
Well, does that mean like there were ants in his cabin, like an antsy? I could see that happening too. Like, oh, it was filthy.
No, I think
I could see him being like, it was filthy, Lucas.
Got tired of sitting still.
I don't do mess. I don't do mess. I've heard him say that so many times.
We'll roast him appropriately for it tomorrow.
It's
but
more
for
fun
right
when he's
now,
here.
It is so much more fun when he's here. For right now, talking about the Titans rookie that you have the highest hopes for in 2022, short term, right? Because you could talk about 5, 7, 8 years down the road and what you might hope for somebody's long-term projection as an NFL prospect. But for 2022, in a year where Ryan Tannehill only returns less than 30% of his wide receiving production as far as guys that caught passes from him in games last season, I mean, you lose everybody. Nick Westbrook-Akina is your leading receiver coming back, and you lose almost everybody else. So highest hopes for in 2022 when it comes to Titans rookies, 615-737-1045. We want to hear yours. Will Bolling, what is yours?
I have hope in 2 Titans offensive rookies, and neither of them are the first-round pick. Kyle Phillips is the main one for me because I think that Kyle Phillips fulfills a need for the Tennessee Titans that they've had ever since Adam Humphries left. They never really fully addressed last season. I think the creativity of what Kyle Phillips can do in between the hash marks is going to make things easier for Robert Woods. I think you've got a lot of versatility within the Titans offense, so that's something that Mike Vrabel and John Robinson are well documented and really liking about guys on either side of the football. Kyle Phillips is one that has no versatility, and I think that's needed. I think it's important for a guy to have a very defined role and to add an element to this Titans offense that didn't really exist last season. Kyle Phillips played in 373 of UCLA's pass plays a season ago. 17 of those were lined outside on the wide end of the formation, split out wide and not in the slot, per Pro Football Focus. 4.58 in the 40 doesn't wow you. He's 5'11", 189. The route running and the route tree of what Kyle Phillips can do is something I don't think the Titans had last season. Chester Rogers, Marcus Johnson, no disrespect to them, they were fine at times, but Ryan Tannehill finds the most chemistry and the most success over those in-breaking routes over the middle. And Kyle Phillips now gives you the in-breaking route and the stop route back to the outside where he can pivot back to the sidelines as well. I think he's the most versatile route-running piece the Tennessee Titans have now. I think Robert Woods is a similar guy to that. You knew what A.J. Brown was going to do. You knew he was slants, goes. He could do everything that was asked of him. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL for that reason. But I think Phillips can do more that the Titans didn't have a season ago.
Yeah, as far as a safety valve goes, right? I mean, that was
right, because
non-existent
I think
last
with
season.
the offensive line the Titans are going to have this season and the offensive line they had last season, the safety valve to me is more important than the home run right now.
Yeah, and they didn't have that at any point really last season,
No.
and largely due to injury, sure. But especially early on, when you're talking about getting acclimated to a new core as far as Ryan Tannehill goes, that's going to be critical for a guy that's been out there at every OTA, at every mini camp, hasn't missed hasn't missed anything of note like we talk about with Treylon Burks and all the concerns there. And Robert Woods coming off the ACL tear, though that recovery seems to be going very, very well. Kyle Phillips does give you something that you didn't have last year. And his wide receivers coach at UCLA actually joined Blaine and Mickey a couple of months ago to talk about this, about what the Titans are getting in rookie Kyle Phillips from UCLA. This was Jerry Neuheisel, the wide receivers coach at UCLA, son of Rick Neuheisel, on Blaine and Mickey earlier this year.
He is a true football player. You know, if you have a chance to, and you can go back and watch his highlights, you can actually pause it. And anytime you watch him, he's always equidistant between everybody he's playing against. You know, in zone, we're always trying to tell him to find the fat of the defense, trying to find the open space. And every time you pause it, he's exactly where he's supposed to be. His understanding of coverage, his understanding of creating separation at the top of the route. There's a route against LSU, against Derek Stingley, who was a first-round pick, where he left him in his dust. Then it decided to break a tackle on a spin move and score a touchdown against him on a big upset in the Rose Bowl. But he is a really, really special player, and what you can expect from him is a dynamic returner and somebody who will always be open when he needs to be open. You know, he was a huge third down threat for us, and he always knew how to create separation and create space, and he'll be a guy who will die for the Titans and will go out and make plays for you.
And that at the end is, I think, the important part of what Kyle Phillips bring you is the third down threat. Third and Humphreys was a thing a couple of years ago when the Titans made the AFC Championship game. They did not replace that a season ago. They didn't really replace it when he got hurt either, in the 2020 COVID season as well. I think that ability for Ryan Tannehill to major in the easier throws, have some connection with a guy, the chemistry with a guy to find the middle of a defense, makes Ryan Tannehill's job easier and makes him more comfortable. And that is the theme of this entire offseason and the entire season for John Robinson and the Tennessee Titans. How do I make my starting quarterback more comfortable? Because when they gambled on Ryan Tannehill continuing to be the guy, they didn't look at any other short-term options at the quarterback position other than Malik Willis as a long-term fit, perhaps down the road. They gambled on the fact that they can make Ryan Tannehill comfortable enough to be as good as he was in 2020 and in 2021 at times. So I think that's the biggest piece the Titans have added. I think it gets the ball out of Ryan Tannehill's hands more quickly and helps a young offensive line with some new pieces. I think Kyle Phillips leads Titans rookies in receptions this season, although I do think Treylon Burks still ends up having more yards, a bigger impact long-term. I'm the most confident in Phillips being the most ready right now, the most immediate impact guy.
And they probably need him to.
I mean, so.
They just need him to. This is not a spot where the Titans can afford to have that similar, rookies coming along slowly theme that's happened over the last couple of years with Dylan Radins last year and Caleb Farley and whichever ones you want to pick out. And there's several contributing factors in all of those individual cases, but they can't have that this year, especially with Treylon Burks and Robert Woods and the attention that they'll be getting early on in the season. Chikakonko is playing behind Austin Hooper. He's going to have time to develop. But a guy like Kyle Phillips, a route technician that can be that safety valve for Ryan Tannehill when that wide receiver 1 and 2 duo are getting all the looks early on, it's going to be so critical to have a guy that you feel like has been there because of the way that he's implemented the playbook and the way that he's been able to spend time with you in the offseason. It doesn't feel like he's a new face in that wide receiver core. I'm worried that I don't know when, how long this is going to snowball with Treylon Burks, but how late into training camp are we going to be when Treylon Burks is still a new face for Ryan Tannehill, right? That's my primary concern right now. He could come out, start a training camp, be out there every practice, and then everything we talked about in OTAs and minicamp will wash away. But if it doesn't, if Treylon Burks is still a quote-unquote new face to Ryan Tannehill as far as throwing him the football a week and a half before the season, then you have cause for concern, and Kyle Phillips will be huge in that respect.
Right, and I don't think there's much cause for concern yet with Treylon Burks. I've said all along that clock begins when training camp begins. That clock begins when preseason begins. If Treylon Burks doesn't play in the Titans' first preseason game for whatever reason, then you're having major concerns, I think, at that point about his productivity as a rookie. But think about this, though. The alternative to Treylon Burks not being as big of a contributor and coming along a little more slowly, the alternative is Robert Woods. The alternative if Kyle Phillips can't really contribute, doesn't really fit within the offense, is Mason Kinsey. That's the other slot receiver the Tennessee Titans have on payroll right now. Perhaps Nick Westbrook-Akina is a better match for that, even though it doesn't obviously fit in the same mold of the smaller slot receiver with a little bit bigger of a route tree. Westbrook-Ikhine, a bit more of a bigger slot. Titans know what he gives them. He's going to make that team out of camp. He's going to be a member of this team. But Nick Westbrook-Ikhine needs to be your fourth option, not your third. Kyle Phillips needs to be the third option for this team. I think they need him to be the slot receiver guy. And I think Tim Kelly could have more of an impact on this offense and be more creative when there's 3 wide receivers on the field on those third downs. Because the Titans are not going to go away from their 12 personnel on first and second downs, on run downs, because this is still a Derrick Henry predicated offense. This, I think, makes the biggest impact on third downs. You put that extra receiver on the field. I think Phillips opens up space for everybody else.
615-737-1045. Robert, did you have one in mind?
I did. I'm going to stay on offense and go with Hassan Haskins. Last year, you saw a lot of guys get carries with Henry going down. You saw McNichols, Hilliard, Foreman, AP, a lot of guys that are no longer here. A lot of snaps that are available. And I know Derrick Henry's going to take a brunt of the carries here, but having a guy who can spell him and come in and potentially finish games or add on to the defense is going to be imperative, especially when you don't know. Henry's coming off another injury. So if he comes out and maybe he hinders himself and he's out another 2 weeks, you're going to have a guy who can carry the rock. And if you find out you can trust this guy in preseason, I think that's going to do wonders for an offense that needs a second guy to take the load off Henry.
I like how different the Titans' strategy has been at running back in the draft recently, where with Darrington Evans, it was a kick returner, guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield, be that complement to Derrick Henry. And then this time around, say, no, just go get you a mini Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
And have Dontrell Hilliard catch balls out of the backfield.
No, I like it from the long-term perspective of the Titans are, A, thinking about life after Derrick Henry. But I think, B, they're not compromising the identity of what they do best when they have a second running back on the field. That was the case when Darrington Evans was here. It was so often when the guy was healthy, he's a wide receiver. You know, you're trying different concepts when he was in the backfield, and the Titans don't have to compromise anything with Hassan Haskins. Similar type of runner, similar mold. Obviously, no one looks like Derrick Henry at the running back position anymore. It's not the 1970s, but Hassan Haskins is close as you were going to get probably in that draft class.
Depth-wise, not talking about guys that you need to have instant impact in 2022, but depth-wise, who's the first one that comes to mind that needs to be able to provide that maybe more than others?
I think it's probably Roger McCreary.
Yeah.
On defense. Because when you think about Caleb Farley's situation coming in this season, whether or not he is completely healthy, the Titans are looking around at the wide receivers within the division and within the AFC and saying, this is a premium position that we want to be good and we want to be young at. And I think Roger McCreary is probably one of the least talked about Titans draft picks because people are going to point to Chikakonkwo, who's the other guy that I have a lot of confidence in for this team. I think he becomes a Swiss Army knife. I think he becomes tight end one within a couple of years for the Tennessee Titans offense. People are going to point to Kyle Phillips. They didn't really have that slot receiver that took the reins of that position. Obviously, the first-round pick, the guy that everyone's going to talk about. But Roger McCreary is a very slept-on second-round pick because of the depth the Titans have at the cornerback position. And I think it remains to be seen the way the Titans use him within the context of that defense, because Elijah Molden is so good at blitzing the quarterback that he can come in as a third-down specialist now, and maybe based on the matchup, McCreary is your nickel. We don't know yet. It's going to depend partly on how quickly he comes along within training camp, but I think one thing's for sure, that if the Titans go in that big dime look as often as they do on third downs, Amani Hooker was that third defensive back, that third safety they would bring in. It earned him a starting spot, and Amani Hooker has become one of the more underrated players, I think, on this Tennessee Titans team. But Roger McCreary is going to have a chance to have a really simple, defined role as a role player, as a rookie. Not a lot of guys have that luxury. Titans can afford to bring him along a little bit more slowly, see what happens with Caleb Farley coming along after his injury. If Farley can't be the guy, which I actually am pretty confident he can be this season, McCreary is good depth at that position.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If things continue to trend slowly, I guess would be the way to put it, with Caleb Farley, Roger McCreary could very quickly become the most important rookie in the short term on this Titans roster.
I think Theo Jackson also is going to have a really good chance at being that third down extra safety. Theo Jackson drafted in a similar spot in the NFL draft as to when the Titans got Amani Hooker. And Amani Hooker also started his career with the Tennessee Titans having a very defined, specific role, covering tight ends, being a third down extra defensive back that Mike Vrabel, Shane Bowen, and Dean Pease at the time would bring in for that exact situation. Theo Jackson can be that guy. I think he ends up being that guy. I think he makes this team. I think he comes in with a very aggressive, single-minded idea about what he is there to do. So then you've got really good depth at the defensive back position. If Roger McCreary needs to be your second cornerback behind Christian Fulton, you still have a couple of guys that can come in, be aggressive, see ball, hit ball defensive backs, Theo Jackson and Elijah Molden.
Final call for phone calls. Which Titans rookie do you have the highest hope for in 2022? 615-737-1045. We'll come back, wrap up the show, do some polls, and be on our way. It's the Buck Reising Show on 104.5 The Zone. Let's wrap things up. It's the Buck Reising Show on 104.5 The Zone. Takeover Day 2.
It's great music choice here.
Robert Walsh.
It's John Cena's return to Raw tonight for the 20th anniversary of his WWE signing.
So, my favorite...
Know your audience.
Yeah, I was whoosh over my head. My favorite YouTube video, though, of all time.
Do you support the military?
So, do you know this YouTube video?
No.
One member of our decorated military needs your help.
Can we find this and play this for Lucas? There might be some expletives on it. We need to do this, though, because we've got a little bit of time. Basically, it's a prank call of a guy calling this lady and just going like, hello, would you like to support the U.S. military? And she goes, oh, why, yes, sure. And he goes, and you can support them this Wednesday night as John Cena, a former U.S. Marine, returns to the ring. And it's that music in the background.
And she's just confused.
And then the best one is he goes, hi, is Champ there? No, I'm not sorry. Who is Champ? Find out this Wednesday night at WWE Super Slam. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, it's fantastic.
I have seen those.
Oh, it's so good.
I have seen those.
We recreated that pretty well right there. That
was not
good.
bad. Not bad.
It's not bad.
I guess we're not necessarily into the darkness then of the summer sports months if John Cena is coming back to Raw
pro
tonight.
Wrestling's around. I might as well. I'm not going to disparage pro wrestling.
You're right,
because
SummerSlam's coming to town.
They'll come at
They
you.
will come at you, though, in this building. Everyone in this building likes pro wrestling.
Yeah.
Except for us and Buck.
Yeah, we are greatly in the minority when it comes to that. Post Malone is coming to town, and he's bringing his 12-carat tour to Nashville's Bridgestone Arena with special guest Roddy Ricch on October 16th. And 104.5 The Zone has your chance to be there. Sign up for your chance to win tickets today at 1045thezone.com. By the way, at 1:20 today, Blaine and Mickey will be giving out some tickets. I'm not going to tell you what they are. I'm just going to tell you got to be listening at 1:20, and you have to have a Ding Dong of the Week. Looking forward to hanging out with Alan Bell today as he fills in for Blaine Bishop. So besides Raw and besides the wrestling events and some Major League Baseball, some Major League Soccer happening this summer, we really have nothing sports-wise to look forward to until SEC Media Days and then football season.
Let's just say football season.
I love SEC Media Days.
God.
I love SEC Media Days. I really do. And it's going to be especially entertaining this year with Billy Napier having to address all the crap we've been talking about for the last 3 hours, with Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban, although I'm worried that they're just going to avoid every question about the little spat they had about a month ago. I've always liked SEC Media Days. It is my personal favorite preseason press conference event before any league starts its regular season.
I used to like it, and then Steve Spurrier retired. And now I don't care.
Yeah, that's true. We have not yet fully replaced Steve Spurrier.
No. Eli Drinkwitz has tried.
Steve
Nerdyer.
But you got to win some games, too.
Nerdy Steve Spurrier.
You got to win some games for your little quips to carry at Media Days the way that Spurrier did.
Just like so-and-so's leading us really well this offseason at quarterback.
Yeah.
So-and-so, they're at a better playing weight. Ex-defensive lineman's lost 20 pounds this offseason. He's looking really good. I think he's had a good summer.
Is that Drinkwitz?
No, that's just generic.
Oh, okay.
SEC
I didn't know who you were going
I was kind of doing like 4 at once right there.
Michael says, don't forget the IndyCar race in Nashville in August, of course.
I'm going to be there for all 3 days of that. Now that I'm a big F1 guy, V-Love tweeting us earlier in the show that it is niche sports season. Really, my whole life is just one big niche sports season. I'm so excited. And the fact that like former F1 drivers are like some of the best drivers in IndyCar. Marcus Ericsson, Colton Herta, future F1 driver. It's very fun. This has been Talking F1.
Let's do some polls.
Hello, everyone listening to the Buck Reising Show. This is Benjamin Kenobi, better known as Obi-Wan. I have but one thing to say. Lucas, use the Force. Use the Force, Lucas, to help interpret what the hell Chewie is saying. Oh, scrap that rubbish.
Lucas, I am not your father. I repeat, I am not your father, nor am I Buck's father.
I was once a Jedi Knight, and what I'm trying to say is, Lucas, it's time to update the final poll results here on the Buck Reising Show. Do it now.
Custom order any new Ford from Two Rivers Fords, and they'll deliver it when it gets manufactured. You had some good polls today. I'm going to put you over the top for this because usually when Buck's in here, he's like, I don't want to do that. How does that? No one's going to respond to that.
That's spot on, by the way.
That's pretty good.
You had some very introspective polls, and this one was my favorite. What TV shows are at the top of your priority list this summer now that sports die down for the rest of the summer? And we got Puka saying, there's still soccer and Mets, but Stranger Things. And also Michael DeJesus says, watching Obi-Wan, Stranger Things, All-American, and The Ozarks. I assume he's watching The Ozarks on the Netflix, connected to the internet.
The Netflixes.
Yeah, it's not a show about the mountain range. Look, Stranger Things is the right answer. Part 1 was incredible. Season 3, a little down. Season 4, one of the best seasons of television that I have watched this year. For All Mankind, another new season for them on Apple TV Plus. An alternate history of if the Russians won the space race to the moon. Very good show. Season 3 just dropped, and it is a solid watch as well.
Sounds like another version of Man in High Castle.
Yes, but this one's not as sci-fi and is actually like realistic.
When does Volume 2 of Stranger Things come out?
July the 1st. I will have it finished on also July the 1st.
But when is it all going to be out? When will we have seen The Strangest Thing?
So we've got to wait like 2 more years for the last season.
Oh, okay.
And that's probably going to be like, hey, we're graduating high school. All the kids at Hawkins are going to college, yada, yada, yada.
Where do the Vols improve the most this offseason? Eric says probably offense. There are no parts lacking besides O-line. Going to be really exciting to watch.
I think wide receiver is the biggest area where they probably improved. I think Brew McCoy is solid. I think Jalen Hyatt brings a bigger role for this upcoming season. And just keeping Cedric Tillman and having Cedric Tillman in year 2 of Josh Heupel, you have a bona fide number 1 star receiver in the SEC.
But you only improve there if Brew McCoy lives up to that 5-star billing and if Jalen Hyatt is able to take that next step.
Right.
If those things don't happen, you don't improve there.
And then there's literally nothing else because you can make that claim at this point.
Yeah, continuity is the other thing that I guess you could talk about. But otherwise, it is hard to point out tangible roster improvements.
Who starts in Texas in 2023? 51% says Quinn Ewers. 49% says Arch Manning. So they're kind of split on that one.
I think it might be neither of them, depending on who is still there, or the other 5 stars that have committed and are still in that quarterback room. I'll give Quinn Ewers the slight advantage.
Kenneth and Tractor Traylon both on Twitter say Arch will redshirt.
I think so, too.
Yeah, could see that.
Which Titans rookie do you have the highest hopes for in 2022? Eric agrees with you and I, Will. He says Haskins and Kyle Phillips because most people say it's going to be Burks, but he does not agree with that. And also Puka says Petit Frere because they really need him.
We did not talk about Nicholas Petit Frere and the role that he's going to have to play depth-wise for this offensive line.
And I think he's your left tackle in a year and has a redshirt season this year for the Titans. I think Phillips and Okonkwo are the 2 guys.
Those are the polls?
Those are the polls.
And that's the show. It was fun, Will Bolling.
Well done, gentlemen. Enjoyed it. Enjoy having Buck back in the building at what Lebowski calls 9:59 and 42 seconds tomorrow. Always a pleasure, boys.
9:59:42, not a second earlier. But we've had some fun. Maybe we'll do it again later this week.
Who's to say?
I don't know. Stay posted. Find out. I'm Lucas Panzica for Will Bolling, for producer Robert Walsh, Blaine and Mickey with special guest Alan Bell coming up next.